you ever speak to me like that again, better be wearing a cup.
Baby steps.
One break, coming up.
Okay, friends, let's everybody take your positions, please. Here we go. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, rolling. Dave!
And
Dave!
Unchained.
welcome to Dave and Dave Unchained, a Van Halen podcast. I'm Dave.
And I'm Dave.
And we are at episode 105. We are officially into the fall, and now that we've switched seasons, we're completely out of the summer and into the fall. How you feeling?
Glad to see the cool weather coming and just gearing up for pumpkin season.
Pumpkin season, that's right. Got a little surprise for you. So I got invited to be a guest on the Regarding Van Halen 3 podcast. Which I laughed about, and I actually mentioned you on the cast and how you would laugh about it and make fun of me. As you well know, they do song by song. So I'm going to ask you if you can guess which song I guessed it on.
I'm sorry, I don't follow you. Guess what on?
You know how they pick one song per episode?
Oh, it must have been About You.
About You? What are you talking about?
From Van Halen 3, right?
About You?
Without You. Sorry, Without You.
No. No, they've already done Without You. So I'm going to be a guest on the Once episode.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
So we had a interesting conversation, went over 2 hours and 45 minutes.
On one song?
Well, it wasn't just
From
one.
Van Halen 3?
Well, it wasn't just one song. It was on Van Halen 3. We talked about a lot of stuff, all regarding Van Halen 3, of course, because that's the theme of the podcast. And I actually brought you up several times. I talked about how Without You is in your top 20 of Van Halen songs of all time, yet you hate Van Halen 3, and, you know, with the whole ordeal, and how you'll be making fun of me to the end of time that I was on the podcast. So it was interesting. It was a really fun time. The guys were great. I want to thank Scott, Wolfie, and also Chaz, who had me on, and it was really, really fun time. They were very cool guys. They had nice things to say about our podcast. They were happy that we gave them a plug, and I'm not exactly sure when this episode is coming out. Let's see. So the next one is Dirty Water Dog, because they're following the track listing of the album, but they're going to probably release that sometime this month, and I would imagine the Once episode is going to come out somewhere in October, maybe? I'm not sure. I don't really do their schedule, so I'm not sure, but look out for that. It'll be coming out soon, but definitely check out their podcast. It's an interesting one. Even if you don't like Van Halen 3, it's a very interesting conversation. They break it down, and what they typically do at the very end is they say, are you going to give the song the ballot or the bullet?
Well done.
That's their thing. So whether you shoot it down or you vote for it. I'm just going to tell you that the ending has an interesting twist that I think everybody's really going to get a kick out of. So I won't tell you what it is, but there's an interesting twist at the end, and I think you're going to laugh your head off, so it'll be fun. It was a really nice conversation, and I said if we want to torture my partner Dave, 2 hours and 45 minutes of talking about Van Halen 3 is the way to do it.
Wow. I'll tell you, I'll give them kudos for being that dedicated to spending that much time on the album.
Yes.
So hard to shoot down any fellow Van Halen fan. What's the name of the podcast?
Regarding Van Halen 3. It's the Regarding series. The whole podcast is not about Van Halen 3. This is a chapter of their podcast. So, like, for example, they did Regarding Lulu, which is the album Metallica did with Lou Reed, and then they did that for several episodes. Right now, they're in the Van Halen 3 mode. So, technically, they're not a Van Halen podcast, like, on the outset, but currently they are focused on Van Halen because they're focusing on Van Halen 3.
So they've done Lulu, and now they're doing Van Halen 3.
Yes. Interesting sort of like albums.
I guess a refreshed look at maligned albums.
Well, I tell you, I also suggested Motley Crue's 1994 album for them.
Well, I know you're a lover of that one, too.
Yeah.
That one's not horrible. It's just too damn long is the problem.
Well, yeah, I guess you could say that about a lot of albums. I could say that about Lulu.
True. Well, you know what? Let me restate. Out of all the songs they put on that album, they just didn't have enough quality songs to make it worth the full, 74, 80 minutes that they had.
You
They
know
could
what?
have
You
chopped
know what?
off 4 or 5 songs, and it would
Yeah.
have been a darn good album.
You know, it's interesting because I really think that was a product of the time, because everybody was putting out CDs, and CDs were like 74 minutes long, so everybody felt the need to fill the whole CD.
Oh, no, right. I get it.
Yeah.
They were doing it because they could.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you had quality for every single one of those. I mean, it's hard enough to come out with a decent album that's like the length of vinyl that was 35, 40 minutes long.
Right.
Now you've got something almost twice as long.
Right.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
But, I think John Corabi gets a bad rap for that, but I don't think he was a bad singer. I don't think he was a bad addition to that band at all.
Yeah.
Well, he wasn't Vince Neil, and the fans rejected that. And again, like, they had some good stuff, but I don't know, that album, for me, after a while, you're listening to that album, you're like, enough. Like, if you're not going to get any more quality songs on this album, please call it a day.
Okay. All right. That sounds cool. Well,
Anyway, before we get on a Motley Crue tangent.
Yeah, exactly. We'll get right into Van Halen news.
Van Halen.
Well, it finally dropped, Dave. Alex Van Halen has announced that he's going on tour. But it's a short one. He's only doing 3 dates. And what are these dates? He's doing a book tour for his book Brothers, which is coming out on October 22nd. So what he's doing is, he's doing 2 book signings, both on the East Coast, by the way. Monday, October 21st at noon at Barnes & Noble in New York City. And one on Tuesday, October 22nd at 6 p.m. at Books and Greetings in North Vale, New Jersey. And then he's doing a live event in Los Angeles on October 29th at 8 p.m., where it's Live Talks LA at the Frost Auditorium in Culver City. Obviously, we can't all make it out to the West Coast. But the cool thing about the live conversation is you can buy a virtual ticket to watch it. And if you want to get tickets for any of these, and I don't know if there's any left, but you can certainly go to van-halen.com. That's van-halen.com. That is Van Halen's official website. Okay, that's the band's website, always has been. They haven't been very active with it in the years, but they are currently using it for Alex's book promotion. So that
Right, they only use it when they want to sell something.
Exactly. That's very true. They pushed the box set on there. Now, what is Alex going to be doing? You're going to get a book and get it signed at the book signing. I don't know what the scenario is, but they're kind of saying all these regulations, no memorabilia, no this, no that. There's all these rules and regulations about this thing. You know, I tell you, these book signings are interesting. You go to them, and you get up to the line. I don't know if you're even going to be able to go up to the table with Alex, talk to him, or get a picture or anything. He won't personalize them. He's just signing a book and moving it past, signing a book. It's so fast, you don't even know what's going on. So we'll see what happens. I am going to go to the one on the 21st in New York City to cover it for the podcast. And most of our coverage of the Alex Van Halen book will most likely be in our November episode, because it's going to take Dave and I time to digest the book and really get all the details, but we're not going to be able to have it for the October episode. But we'll have something special for the October episode. I'm already working on that. But here's the plan for the Live Talks LA. I know it's kind of a strange name, but that's what it's called. Okay, so it's $55 if you go in to the place in person, but $50 virtual, which is crazy, I think.
Wait, say that again?
Isn't that crazy? Yeah. So if you go to the event live, in person, it's $55 and you get a signed book with it. And if you do a virtual event, you still get a signed book, which is shipped to you, but it's $50. So you get the virtual experience. And what they'll let you do is you'll get it and you'll be able to watch it on October 29th. So that should be interesting. And what he's going to do with that is he's going to talk with his co-author, Ariel Levy. and she is a New York Times best-selling author. She had a best-selling memoir called Rules Do Not Apply. She's also a National Magazine Award winner for her work on The New Yorker, where she's been on staff since 2008. And she's also a co-creator of the podcast Just Enough Family. So she's going to be discussing the book with him. Curious to see what that is going to be like. I don't know, because Alex is not exactly a man of many words. I'm actually surprised he's even doing the voice over for the book. He's actually narrating his own book. So that's actually shocking, but maybe he felt it was so personal he had to. So
yeah, that was a pleasant surprise. I mean, we can't call this a tour. I mean, it's 3 dates.
Well,
That's
I'm
weekend,
joking. I'm
right?
saying it facetiously, yeah.
No, I know, but I could just see he was probably like, what's the minimum amount of dates I need to do? 3. Then I'm doing 3, right?
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Exactly.
I think you're going to the New York show.
Yep.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't call it a show, but
yeah.
The New York event. I'm not going to any of them. I was waffling on whether I'm going or not. But my understanding is that both of the East Coast dates are sold out.
Wow.
And I think live attendance at the California one is 2.
Wow.
Again, how much are they charging to attend the California one virtually?
$50. But you get a book with it. You get a signed book with it.
You do get a signed book.
You do,
but you got to be careful about the signed book.
Yeah.
Because I'm not so sure the book itself is
No,
signed.
I know. It's like a signed plate that gets inserted into the book.
Right, which is different.
I know.
So,
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
But
I know.
to me, I'm just kind of like, I just want to read the book. Or actually, I might spring for the audio book, and I might want to actually listen to it, which is another reason why it may take us a while to review the book. Because the audio book, I think there's 2 different numbers floating around out there. Like, it's anywhere between like 6 to 8 hours.
I have here 720 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So whatever that
All right.
breaks down to, you do the math. Now, the more and more I read about this book, it's a love letter to his brother, an intimate and open account of their personal musical relationship. Nothing like any rock and roll memoir you've ever read. But, you know, he did say, though, that everybody has kind of had their say about what's going on, but no one really knows what happened in the band. So I'm wondering if he's actually going to address what he thinks was the true story of the inner workings of the band. That is the big question.
I think he will selectively discuss certain things that he feels are important. And by the way, you said it was 720 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
That's a 12-hour audio book. So
it's like half a day, yeah.
Right. So buckle up, Buttercup.
That's right.
Be a long listen.
And since we last talked to you guys, Alex has announced that he is going to have a track called Unfinished. I think maybe we mentioned it on the last cast, but he did drop a clip of it. So a little teaser clip of this instrumental jam, which was the last song he and Eddie worked on. And here's a clip of it. So he dropped this on Instagram, and as its title suggests, it's sort of insight into their creative process. You know, it's like an unpolished kind of thing. So we'll see what happens. My guess is this is like a rehearsal tape. I don't think he went to Wolf and got this. I think this is a tape that Alex had from jamming with Eddie and decided to use it in promotion for the book.
Oh, yeah. I think it's definitely some kind of demo tape or rehearsal tape or whatever. And interestingly, you and I both had the same reaction to this song, which is, oh, wow, this sounds like a Van Halen 3 outtake, or at least something from that era. And we both said that right away. And by the way, Dave, you and I are not the only ones who are saying that. There was, as you might expect, some chatter about this at VH Links.
Yeah.
People there were saying the same thing, that it definitely has that late 90s sound about it, which raised an interesting question, because I think there was some press that said this was Ed's last song
Yes,
or,
I know.
whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And people were like, I don't know, because it really has that late 90s sound.
Yeah.
And that's not how he was sounding in 2015 when he was on tour with Van Halen.
Right.
So, I mean, who knows? It could very well be we're all just talking out of our butts. But it was an interesting observation that everybody was thinking it had that late 90s tone about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, they jammed a lot, so God knows it could be any time. But the cool thing is it's an unreleased track from Ed and Al. It'll be interesting. My question is, apparently, from what I read, it seemed like it was going to be playing in the background while he was reading, but are we going to get a full cut of it instrumentally? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, I was wondering that too. I guess we'll just have to wait and see on that one.
Like, I'm wondering, are they going to put it on Spotify? I mean, I don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah, I wasn't under that impression, but if it was me, I'd certainly be doing that.
Then my other question is, if you do buy the audio, do you get unfinished in addition to the book? That's what I want to know. And then the other thing I wanted to know was, there's some sort of deluxe set going on, and I don't know what the details are on that.
I have not heard much about that. So that's an excellent question.
All I saw was on van-halen.com that there was a deluxe set, but that it was not available for pre-order. And I was like, well, what's a deluxe set? So I have no idea. Usually the deluxe sets are the ones that go on pre-order, but who knows?
It's almost like they're trying to get everybody to buy the regular book first and then buy the deluxe edition.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Which smells pretty crappy, quite frankly.
Exactly. Now, moving on, we talked about the different interviews that Eddie Trunk has done with all the members of Sam's The Best of All Worlds band, including Sam, including Jason Bonham, including Joe Satriani. But when we last left you guys, we had not heard the Michael Anthony interview, and that has finally dropped. So Michael Anthony spoke with Trunk. It really wasn't all that of detailed an account. A lot of glad handing back and forth, Eddie talking about how much, they know each other and love each other and blah, 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 all that kinds of chummy bullshit. But one thing that did come out of it, which was really interesting and sort of sad in a way, Mike had made this interesting reflection that he never expected to be the last member of Van Halen's classic lineup still actively touring. He says, I don't really think about it consciously that I'm the only person. He said, I'm the only one from the original band left out here doing this. And I thought, whoa, that's a trip. I never really thought about that. He's actively on tour playing Van Halen songs, and Dave's retired, Ed's no longer with us, and Al has sold all his drums and writing his memoirs and kind of going off into the sunset. So he said that Ed's death really closed the whole deal on the original Van Halen ever getting back together. He said, I always thought that it would have been either him or Alex. They would have carried on after everybody was gone, or everybody broke up, or everybody stopped getting along. He said, here I am, I'm the guy. And it's interesting because, he said Alex sold everything down to his last drumstick. Now, that really kind of surprised me, but maybe that's just his way of giving himself some closure on the whole thing, and now he's putting out his book. He said, I tried to get a hold of him in May, but I did not hear back from him, so I don't know. I didn't want to push it. I didn't want to keep trying to get a hold of him or whatever. He said, obviously, Sammy and I were hoping he'd come out at some point, but Sammy's been trying, and he hasn't had any luck getting a hold of Alex. So what did you make of that, Dave?
Interesting observation by him that he is last man standing of the original band. And when I say standing, like he said, touring. When you sit back for a second and think about that, he's got to be like, wow, especially if you're thinking Ed and or Al would be the one doing it. But as fans, we're certainly grateful that he's doing it with Sam, with anybody. So we can't thank him enough for doing that. Mike as always takes the high road. Like you mentioned earlier, there really wasn't a shockingly amount of new information out there from him, but he's just doing his thing. He's enjoying it. And that's how he's been living his life for a while now. So you can't really fault the guy for that.
No, and he's playing fantastic. He sounds great. Dave and I saw him. He's singing fantastic. He turned 70? I think he might have. I think he did. I don't remember. Is he 70?
I forget. If he's not, he's close.
He's right there, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, he's up there. Listen, he's looking great, sounding great, playing great. Unfortunately, Sam's Best of All Worlds tour had a little bit of a shakeup. Tour went on no problem. However, poor Jason Bonham had to leave the tour on the last 4 dates because his mom, Pat Bonham, who is John Bonham's wife, his widow, took ill. She had a stroke. So Jason left the tour and had to go overseas to go see and be with his mom and his sister. Who came to the rescue to fill in behind the kit? Kenny Aronoff. So he played the last 4 dates of the Best of All Worlds tour, which was August 27th at the Riverbend Music Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. Then August 28th at Bridgestone Arena in Nashville, Tennessee. And August 30th at the Ruffo Music Center in Noblesville, Indiana. And then the closing date, which was August 31st at the Hollywood Casino Amphitheater in Maryland Heights, Missouri. So the tour finished off no problem, but Kenny had to learn the set list within 24 hours, Dave. And he is such a pro that he did it. So when they went on stage, Sammy said, tonight I'm going to dedicate this to the Bonham family in England before going into Eagles Fly. I hope everything works out over there, and we give love to our brother Jason. So Jason went to be with his mom, and he tweeted out that I'm in the UK with my family as we navigate a very difficult situation, and I need all your prayers right now. He had posted that on social media. His mother is 76 years old. He was there with his sister Zoe, and she's seriously ill. And apparently I heard she was in a coma, so I'm so sorry to hear about that. I hope she's okay. And he had to pause some of his Led Zeppelin evening dates as well. I do believe Kenny's going to Japan with them as well.
He is.
Yeah, so he had to fill in there. Sammy said Jason's family emergency was a sudden thing. His mother had a stroke and went into a coma, and it's serious. So his whole family went over there to the United Kingdom. He held out for 2 or 3 days, then he said, I gotta go. And he said, go, you gotta go. So we called Kenny, and he had 24 hours notice, and he came in the first night, and he said he got there at 6 in the morning, and we played that night in Cincinnati, and he did a 90% perfect show, I swear to you. I make more mistakes every night than he did. And he said, big hats off to this guy. And said, if we have to go to Japan with him, we'll go to Japan with him. I just love playing with him because he's so enthusiastic. He's the most enthusiastic guy. Oh man, we're going to kill it. Don't worry about me. He was foaming at the mouth and he was going crazy. So, and it was found out that Jason, the role he was trying to get in Chickenfoot was the Kenny Aronoff role, the fill-in role.
It was the second tour role?
It was, yes. Absolutely.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So now, another interesting thing was, on the second to last night, the one in Ruff Music Center in Noblesville, Indiana, they got through the set. They were going a good enough pound cake, run around. There's only one way to rock. And Judgment Day, after that, they had to stop the show and pause it due to inclement weather. And they waited it out for 45 minutes because there was lightning going on. Then they kicked back into the set list. Panama, 5150, Summer Nights, Ain't Talk About Love, Top of the World, Best of Both Worlds, Satch Boogie, Seven Seal, Right Now, Why Can't This Be Love, Eagles Fly, I Can't Drive 55. Then they had to wrap it up. So before they could finish off, and they had only that medley where they do Space Station number 5, Bigfoot and Jump, and When It's Love. And then what they did was, to cap off the show, they did an a cappella version of Cabo Wabo. And they had to tell the audience that the show was over, so they got shortchanged a little bit. But then the next night, which was in the Hollywood Casino Amphitheater in Maryland Heights, Missouri, which was the final night of that leg of the tour. They actually did the whole show. And they even added, after When It's Love, the Cabo Wabo a cappella version, which was interesting. So that was a new little twist to the end there, Dave. What do you think of that?
That is always frustrating when you don't get the whole show.
Oh, yeah.
And, there's no adjustment of the ticket price. There's no refund.
No.
Like, as soon as they play that minimum amount of time,
Yep.
Dave, you'll have to correct me.
It's an hour.
I think it's something. Is it an hour? I thought it was like an hour and 15 minutes.
No, it's
an
the
hour.
headliner plays an hour.
Okay. So, and that's not a whole heck of a lot of time. I mean, for some headliners, that's like half a show. So I can get if you go.
But they got most of the show. And they got the best part of the show.
But still, it's like, I guess it's better than nothing. I mean, I think Sammy's has been plagued by weather issues a lot on this tour. Because I remember when we saw him, I think we were like the 6th or 8th show into the tour, something like that. Mm-hmm. And he said this was only the second show where it hadn't rained that night.
Oh, wow.
So he's doing shed shows and outside shows. And when you do that, you know, the weather is always a gamble.
True.
So I think, you know, in some ways we get lucky if it's not raining. So I get people's frustration, but I mean, what can you do? You can't stop Mother Nature.
That's true. Now, Sam has announced some 2025 dates, which were interesting dates. They weren't the typical ones, and I don't think these are best of all world dates. He's playing the San Antonio Stock Show and Rodeo at the Frost Bank Center in San Antonio, Texas on February 20th at 7 p.m. His set follows the rodeo semifinals. Very strange. Another strange booking, the Stagecoach California Country Music Festival on the Empire Polo Club in Indio, California, April 25th through the 27th. Sammy's playing on the last day, the 27th. He's number 3rd on the bill under Luke Combs and Midland. Other headliners of the festival include Zach Bryan, Brothers Osborne, Lana Del Rey, Jelly Roll, Sturgill, Simpson, and Nelly. Very strange company for Sam to be in. Well, what do you make of that?
I'd say that is interesting. I mean, it is, but not as interesting as it could be because I feel like Sam knows everybody. I'm not so surprised anymore whenever he's hanging out with certain people. Definitely a little surprised that some of those shows coming up, I guess he's trying different things. Yeah, I don't think those are best of all worlds shows.
Yeah.
But hey, anytime you can see Sammy, go for it.
Absolutely. Now, Billboard released the 100 most iconic guitars of all time.
Here we go.
Here we go. Now, of course, what are we looking for? Where does Eddie's Frankenstein come in? It came in at number 3. And I'm furious. And I'll tell you why. Because we're not talking about guitarists now. We're talking about, I'm going to reiterate it, the 100 most iconic guitars of all time. Now, here's the thing. We're talking about the actual instrument itself, not the player. The instrument itself. I don't think there is a more recognizable guitar than the Frankenstein. Now, number 1 is Jimi Hendrix 1965 Fender Stratocaster Monterey. Nothing wrong with the guitar. It's a very famous guitar. But if I held a picture of that guitar up to people and took a survey, there is no way they're going to pick that out as Jimi Hendrix's guitar because it looks like a Fender Stratocaster and it's pretty generic. Eddie's guitar is so unique and iconic, it literally is almost like the Stones' tongue. Maybe not as well known as that, but it's a symbol and is well known as almost the Van Halen symbol. Van Halen symbol obviously clues you off with the VH, but it is a symbol in and of itself. So I find that striking. Now, the other thing is, Eddie made Frankenstein by hand. Literally. He actually made his own guitar by hand. I think that should make it the top of all of them. By the way, number 2 is Willie Nelson's 1969 Martin N20, known as Trigger. And if you ever see Willie's guitar, it looks about as old as Willie. It is beat to
That's
shit.
very true.
It is beat to shit. And I love Willie, and I think he's great. But it looks like it should be retired. It's got, like, massive holes in it. I even know how the guitar is standing, to be honest with you. It really looks like some sort of antique or something, you know, like that you would see in a museum. How could it even play at this point? Eddie is number 3. Now, just wanted to give you a couple, before we get into this, a couple of other ones that were on the list. Okay, number 4, B.B. King's Lucille. We all know Lucille is one of the most iconic guitars of all time. Number 5, Chuck Berry's 1955 Gibson ES 350T. Number 6, Angus Young's Gibson SG. Definitely a famous guitar. Number 7, David Gilmour's 1969 Fender Stratocaster, the Black Strat. Number 8, Robert Johnson's Gibson L1. Number 9, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, 1961 White Les Paul. Number 10, Stevie Ray Vaughan's 1963 Fender Stratocaster, known as Number 1. Now, I noted some other ones that I think that were famous because there's 100, but the ones that stood out to me, Jeff Beck's 1954 Les Paul Oxblood. This, in my opinion, should have been way up top, right next to Eddie's, if you ask me. Should be number 2, in my opinion. Coming in at 14, Brian May's The Red Special. That is very unique to Brian. Number 15, another one iconic, Jimmy Page's 1969 Gibson EDS 1275 double neck. We all know that double neck guitar, iconic from Song That Remains the Same. John Lennon comes in at number 20 with his 1965 Epiphone Casino. 21 is Keith Richards' 1954 Fender Telecaster Mick Cauber, I think they call it. 24, Eric Clapton Stratocaster Blackie. 26, Les Paul's The Log. 37, Slash's Chris Gehrig Les Paul replica. 38, Steve Vai's Ibanez Gem, which Steve built with Ibanez. Number 40, Prince's Dave Ruskin Custom Cloud. Number 41, Tony Iommi's 1964 Gibson SG Special Monkey. Number 43, Joan Jett's 1977 Gibson Melody Maker. Number 45, Jerry Garcia's Doug Irwin Custom 1973 Wolf. This one should have been higher. Number 46, Randy Rhoads Carl Sandolph Custom 1979 V. Number 47, Jimi Hendrix returns with his Fender Stratocaster Woodstock. And number 68, Rick Nelson's 1981 Hammer 5-neck. We all know how crazy that one is. This is a cool one. Number 70, Brian Jones's Vox Mark III Teardrop. Very cool. Number 73, Ace Frehley, 1964 Gibson Les Paul Custom Budokan. And our buddy Joe, Dave, coming in at 74 with his 1990 Ibanez JS Special Chrome Boy. So, what they said about Ed in the listing is that Ed revolutionized not only how people played the guitar, but also the very guitars they played. Frankenstein inspired Super Strats, featuring similar brash color schemes, hot rod electronics, and high-impact locking tremolo systems. With a white body in the photos from before the band signing to Warner Brothers with black stripes on the cover of their 1978 self-titled debut, and then eventually its most recognizable red, white, and black guys on Van Halen's 1979 tour, supporting their sophomore album Van Halen 2. Frankenstein featured many different pickups in its bridge position, but Van Halen eventually settled on the patent number humbucker removed from the 1964 Gibson ES 335. Though it began its life with a traditional Fender Stratocaster bridge, Frankenstein would eventually be fitted with a double-locking Floyd Rose tremolo that allowed Van Halen to perform his signature dive bombs without going out of tune. And at some point, he screwed a 1971 quarter into the face of the guitar. So, yes, it's super, super unique. And my God, how is that not number one, Dave?
Admittedly, I am very biased, and I think Ed's guitar should be number one. I think visually, it's probably the one that most people recognize and associate with a guitarist. I'm not taking anything away from Jimi Hendrix or any other player, but that's where I'm coming from. Although by your reckoning, Dave, I would say that would mean Brian May should have the number one spot, because Ed certainly customized his guitar, but the reason it was called Frankenstein, as you know, is because he took parts from every other guitar and combined them into one. Brian built his from like a piece of wood, right? Uh-huh. Like he made it from the ground up. So that takes a lot of dedication. So by all rights, if that's how you're judging it, then Brian should get the number one spot.
Well, wait a second. It's the most iconic. There is no way the Red Special is as iconic as Frankenstein.
I agree with you, but you do get points for having a guitar that looks a certain way, sounds a certain way. You built it. I mean, Brian certainly has a tone that you can easily recognize when he plays.
For sure.
But certainly Ed checks off all those boxes too, and then some. Again, I'm biased, but Ed really recognized the value of a visual aspect to the guitar and certainly made it his own that way.
Absolutely. But, the thing about Ed's is it basically is like a jalopy car. You know what I mean? He just jerry-rigged the whole goddamn thing, and it's so bizarre. And if you listen to what Joe talked about it. In fact, I have some quotes from Joe. He talked about how crazy the Frankenstein is. He says it took him a little while before he became accustomed to playing Frankenstein. Now, Joe is playing like a replica Frankenstein. Obviously, he's not playing Ed's actual Frankenstein. So when prepping for the Best of All Worlds tour, he said, it was lifeless, and I struggled with keeping the guitar in tune. It must have taken 2 weeks of tweaking to wrestle that thing to the point where it would stay in tune. Satriani even called upon Ed's old guitar techs in order to get a better understanding of how he could optimize the design. He says from there, he took a few creative liberties and turned the template into his own. He said, we contacted all of Eddie's techs to ask how they take things apart and redo them, how they file down this, put a screw in there, change this or that, anything to keep this thing in tune. I eventually changed the pickup to a Sustain-atic. I knew I would need it because we were playing Van Halen, Chickenfoot, and even some of my songs. So I said, okay, I may not have time to switch guitars, so I'll make these guitars work for several things. So Joe was even mystified by the Frankenstein, and if you remember, he only played it on like one song when we saw him, right?
Yeah, it was only the one.
And it was the Sammy song.
It was. That was the bizarre part.
Yeah, that was
even
absolutely
a Van Halen song.
Absolutely strange. Also wanted to let you guys know about a very interesting interview that Jeremy White, who is a podcaster and a YouTuber, he's an interesting, nice guy, interviews a lot of rock stars, did an interview with Thomas Dolby. And he specifically interviewed Thomas about his relationship with Ed. And we all know that Ed played on his album, what was it called? Astronauts and something or other? I forgot the name of it.
Astronauts and Heretics.
Okay, there you go. And he said that his wife, Kathleen Bella, had worked with Ed's wife, Valerie Bertinelli, over the years in TV. Kathleen, believe it or not, was unaware of who Ed was. And when she asked him what he did for a living, he said, I'm the best rock and roll guitarist on the planet. And he started warming up in front of her, and she couldn't believe what she was seeing because he was playing the guitar the way Ed plays the guitar, which is incredible. And then she ended up seeing him live in Irvine in front of 15,000 people, and believe it or not, she had no idea who he was, which is crazy, especially considered she married to a musician. Now, in regarding his relationship, Thomas said, I had a great relationship with Ed. We clicked musically, although we were a little shy of each other. We were both a mixture of shy and arrogant. But I went to his studio on the weekend when they were recording the Fuck album, and he said that he was playing Ed some of his tracks from his solo album. And Andy Johns showed up on a bender, and Ed sent him away, and then they heard a crash outside, and Andy Johns had drove into one of the statues on the property, and he said that, Val's going to get mad. And then he also described 5150 as a boy cave with a popcorn machine and a hot dog machine and video games. He said it was really kind of fun, and he says they worked for a while, and then they drove down to the house in a Frankenstein-striped golf cart, which he said as he drove by, there was a crowd on Mulholland Drive that was waiting just to catch a glimpse of Ed, and they were all cheering him. And he said that he used Frankenstein on the song Eastern Bloc, and also on Close But No Cigar, he used a semi-acoustic Gibson, where Ed played on those songs. He said, I always felt that the band sort of had him by the balls. They really didn't want him to work with other people. In fact, his brother said to me, we would have been number one if it wasn't for, and then he kind of left it blank what Alex said. And he said that kept us from being number one. So I don't want him working with anybody else. He could have done an awesome solo record, but I think it was too scary for him to be elevated to that level. So that was an interesting exchange. What did you think of that?
Yeah, that was an interesting observation. I mean, there may be some truth to that. Ed never did a solo album per se. Quite a few would like to argue that Van Halen 3 was a solo album. Mm-hmm. There are some compelling arguments for that. I personally don't know if I would go all the way with that, but the more I learn about Van Halen 3, the more I think that could have been the case. But yeah, for whatever reason, Ed never said, I'm just going to do a solo album without anybody I've ever worked with before. And he never really went down that path.
Yeah, interesting. Also wanted to let you guys know about a recently released bootleg on YouTube from the Pasadena High School, May 3rd, 1974, of Van Halen playing at the Pasadena High School, May 3rd, 1974. It includes a bunch of original songs, and this is the set list. Raging River of Fear, Parchment Farm, which is a cover of the Cactus song, I Can Hardly Wait, Out of Love, which is an early version of Out of Love again, but it's just called Out of Love, this one, and then the 5-minute drum solo. Early version of In a Simple Rhyme with different lyrics, the same chorus. In the Morning, which is sort of a blues cover. Glitter, I Come Tumbling, Take Your Whiskey Home, which is kind of a dirty boogie like Van Halen does ZZ Top with the same chorus but different lyrics. there's a guitar solo, which has a little snippet of Eruption, and then goes into Wildfire. And believe it or not, this is sort of an interesting thing here. David Lee Roth on the mic thanks the band Snake, which is Michael Anthony's original band, for borrowing their PA. So this is an interesting marking of time, so how Michael Anthony ended up coming into the band. They did a cover of Waiting for the Bus, which was a ZZ Top cover, a song called Believe Me, and a song called Show Your Love, which originally turned into I'm the One. Different lyrics, same chorus, but there was no saying I'm the One. It was Show Your Love. Guys were in their early 20s, if not 19. David Lee Roth had his rap down. It was very gritty and kind of dirgy in many ways, but not really as commercial as Van Halen came to be. And it's on the channel 5150 Mikey V if you guys want to check it out. So this was a really fun listen, Dave, and it's about a little over an hour, about an hour and 15 minutes or so. Very cool piece of history. What did you think of this?
Fascinating piece of Van Halen history. Right. I think when you say dirgy, that's really a decent description of how it was. Part of it is the sound quality.
Yeah.
This wasn't professionally recorded or anything, and they tried to clean it up as best they could. But Van Halen was still figuring themselves out, and there is a little more jamming than they normally would do. Songs are a little longer. The blues song they do, Dave, you know I'm a sucker for any kind of good blues song.
Yeah.
And the fact that Van Halen is doing a blues song, I think it's a B.B. King cover, is just phenomenal to hear because it's such a rarity. And the early versions of Van Halen songs, hearing them in their early stages is really a hoot. And of course, the historical nature that this was the infamous show when the band's PA broke down and they had to ask Snake, which is Michael Anthony's band, as you pointed out, for their PA, obviously led on to future things. And the bass player is not Michael Anthony in this instance. So the bass player is Mark Stone. And he even gets a bass solo in this show, so which shows that he's a very competent bass player. And so the background vocals sound a little different. It's just really a fascinating piece of history and not your typical Van Halen bootleg. And I think it might be the oldest Van Halen bootleg that's an entire live show.
Wow.
So if you haven't heard it yet, you should definitely go and listen to it. It's fascinating listening.
Yeah, and they are called Van Halen at this time.
Yes, for sure.
For sure. And it's really interesting. And for 1974, it sounds pretty damn good. It doesn't sound as muddy. They cleaned it up pretty decent. So for a bootleg from 74, we're talking about 50 years ago, it sounds good. So definitely want to check that out for sure. And wrapping up Van Halen news, we have a little bit of a plug for our friend Simon Alkin, who has the YouTube channel Icons Remembered. Now, if you remember, he had the Edward Van Halen, a musician, which was that mini documentary that he did on Edward earlier in the year. Well, let me tell you something. He's back with a new one, and it's called Edward Van Halen, the early guitars in his own words. And it's on his YouTube channel, Icons Remembered. It's about 9 minutes long. And it will take you from Eddie's Tedesco Del Rey all the way up through Frankenstein. So it's showing Ed's early guitars through the years And it's all spoken in Ed's words, describing his guitars, how he bought them, how he built them, the journey he's had with them. There's some background music there, and it's a progression of how Ed moved from one guitar to the next. And he talks about how he developed them. It's really, really well done. Simon is an ace at this. And I want you guys to give him some love because you're going to love this. He's a professional, this guy. This is not just some fan throwing this together. He's a professional, and he's doing more. He's got a whole series of them that he's working on, and I'm so excited about this. I'm encouraging him to continue, and he's got some really great Van Halen subjects that he's going to be focusing on in these mini documentaries that are like under 10 minutes. It's really, really cool. Edward Van Halen, the early guitars in his own words. Check it out on YouTube on Icons Remembered channel. What did you think of this, Dave?
That is some good stuff. Definitely encourage people to support other people who are supporting Van Halen.
Yeah.
Wow, that was a mouthful. There was an easier way for me to say that. But anyway, yeah, I'm glad you're encouraging him to keeping the series going.
Yeah.
Because the first few episodes were fantastic. And I'm definitely looking to see more of them because he really does put his heart and soul, and you can tell he's doing it from a fan perspective. And nobody else is going to be doing anything like this anytime soon, certainly not officially.
Right.
So keep it coming, dude. We support you 100 gazillion% on this.
Absolutely. Guys, you're going to want to see it if you're a fan. This is why we tell you about the books to read, the videos to watch. These are the things you're going to get. They're going to come from the fans. The band is going to maybe release something here or there from time to time. We got Alex's book to look forward to, but we want to savor everything we can. And when a fan puts effort, let me tell you something, this stuff takes a long time. If you see this documentary, he has photos and Ed's voice talking about each guitar. It's all in Ed's voice. 9 minutes. And it's got each guitar and photos of Ed with each guitar. It's beautiful. And it really is well put together, and Simon does such an incredible job. Icons Remembered. So not only check it out, subscribe to his channel. Doesn't cost you a thing. It's free. Just subscribe to it. So this way, you know when the new one comes out, and you can always get in there and check it out. So definitely want to do that. And that wraps up Van Halen News.
And that's the way it is. Good night.
And we are on to our interview with our good friend and fan, Brad Snitzer. He went to a rock and roll fantasy camp with Michael Anthony. He also did it with Vic Johnson. He also did it with Steve Vai. He also did it with Sammy Hagar. This guy has had the rock and roll fantasy camp experience with all these Van Halen ties, especially recently with Michael Anthony celebrating the 40th anniversary of 1984. And he talks to us all about what it's like to be in a rock and roll fantasy camp, how it happens. He played Panama with Michael, and he got to talk to him, ask him questions, all kinds of stuff. Talked to Vic, talked to Steve Vai, talked to Sammy. They were all different times he did the rock and roll fantasy camp. A lot of us can't afford to go, but he'll at least give you the inside skinny on what it's like to do it. So we get into that with him, and got a double feature here. Dave and I have been working on this for a while. It's Dave and Sam by the numbers. Well, what is that? A side-by-side comparison of all things Dave and Sam, but done numerically. So we're talking about singles and album sales and charts and tours, all by the numbers, and who successfully did what over the other one. So this is a real interesting side-by-side comparison that Dave and I worked up. It's a real deep dive discussion. We went into way detail on that. But before that happens, we got some mailbag to get through, and that is all coming up next. Take a listen.
What was our original recording deal on records? Because most people don't really know what happens behind records. What's really a producer? What's really what's really a mix? What's really
I know what they called it. They called it a Motown deal.
Okay, go ahead, man. Just
Which was
as you remember.
which was
I'll do it, and then you do it.
Which was an 11-point deal.
What do you mean by 11 points?
That we didn't find out until much later. That a point is 1%, not of 100%, but 1% of 90%. And the basis for that came from in the old days when 78s were delivered. Upon delivery, approximately 10% of the product broke. So they paid you on 90% of the delivery.
Oh, if you watch Boardwalk Empire right now, 1920s, those are acrylic records, really heavy breakable ones. My father gave me a collection of Al Jolson, on 78s that I actually broke. They fell from the desk, and they're priceless now. I'm killing myself, but they broke into pieces. And 1 out of 10 of those broke in 1924.
So you're not getting paid on a buck. You're getting paid on 90 cents.
Records look like CDs, but they're bigger.
So it's one penny out of 90 pennies is a point, basically. Okay? Now, we had an 11-point deal, and 3 points went to Ted, our producer. Okay?
Ted still makes more money than I do on those first 2.
Oh, yeah, he makes more than all of us.
But he's still Ted.
Now, okay, so that leaves 8. Out of the 8, we had to pay agents, attorneys.
Well, the whole thing was a loan. It was like an 18% loan.
Yeah, but I mean, the band, if I remember right, got to split, I think, 3 points by the time we were done.
I think we split $1.15 between the 4 of us.
And don't forget.
And then paid for everything.
Pick up the new book, Eruption, Conversations with Eddie Van Halen, by Brad Tolinsky and Chris Gill. These music journalists share with fans new and old alike a candid, compulsively readable, and definitive oral history of the most influential rock guitarist since Jimi Hendrix. It is based on more than 50 hours of unreleased interviews they recorded with Eddie Van Halen over the years, most of them conducted at the legendary 5150 Studios at Ed's home in Los Angeles. The heart of Eruption is drawn from these intimate and wide-ranging talks, as well as conversations with family, friends, and colleagues. In addition to discussing his greatest triumphs as a groundbreaking musician, including an unprecedented dive into Van Halen's masterpiece 1984, the book also takes an unflinching look at Edward's early struggles as a young Dutch immigrant unable to speak the English language, which resulted in lifelong issues with social anxiety and substance abuse. Eruption, Conversations with Eddie Van Halen, also examines his brilliance, who changed the face of guitar manufacturing. Eruption, Conversations with Eddie Van Halen. Get your copy today on Amazon.com. Author Greg Renoff is back with a new book, Ted Templeman, A Platinum Producer's Life and Music. The new biography of the record producer Ted Templeman, who went on to produce Van Halen, the Doobie Brothers, Van Morrison, Aerosmith, Sammy Hagar, and more. The book, which runs $19.95, and it's currently available at Amazon.com. From the man who brought you Van Halen Rising comes Ted Templeman, A Platinum Producer's Life and Music, written by Templeman as told to Greg Renoff. Available for only $19.95 at Amazon.com. Order it today.
Hey everybody, this is Steve Rosen, rock journalist, author of Tone Chaser, the hardback, and the audiobook. You are listening to the one and only Dave and Dave Unchained.
If you need a dose of VH, get a taste of the closest thing. Romeo Delight, the ultimate Van Halen tribute band, playing all the hits from the David Lee Roth era, first classic 6 albums, plus deep cuts, some of which have never been played live before by the band. They even throw in popular tracks from the Sammy Hagar era and solo hits. The most viewed Van Halen tribute band on YouTube, Romeo Delight, doing customized recreations of staging, instruments, and costumes from the classic Van Halen era. They even perform entire Van Halen albums in sequence. Romeo Delight plays theaters, casinos, summer indoor and outdoor festivals, and special events. They're also available for private parties. To contact them, call Bud Blanche at 215-704-5144. That's 215-704-5144. or via email at sonicparade1@yahoo.com. Romeo Delight, the ultimate Van Halen tribute band. Pick up the new coffee table-sized book, The Decade That Rocked, by legendary rock photographer Mark Weiss. This 376-page book has hundreds and hundreds of full-color photos that Weiss shot through the 80s for magazines like Circus, Faces, and Hit Parader, featuring bands like Van Halen, Motley Crue, Twisted Sister, Bon Jovi, Skid Row, Guns N' Roses, Ozzy Osbourne, and more. There's even behind-the-scenes stories to go with these colorful, eye-popping pictures. The Decade That Rocked, a new book by rock photographer Mark Weiss, is available for purchase now. Go to thedecadethatrocked.com, where there are exclusive bundles available with extra prints, t-shirts, and even patches. Inquire about the Van Halen bundle, especially made for Dave and Dave Unchained listeners. Order today. The Decade That Rocked. It'll rock your world.
We didn't have any PA equipment. When Red Ball Jet was out of work, when they didn't have a gig, I would approach Roth and ask him, we'd like to rent your PA. And he would rent it to us, give him $10. And this went on for a few months. And eventually I just said to Ed, look, you're not really capable of being the front man and singer. I said, Ed, rather than paying Roth us $10 every time we rent his stuff, why not just get him in the band, and we won't have to pay him $10, and we'll have a lead singer. Because he, at that time, he walked around with a certain confidence that was good, I felt.
All right, Dave, you know what time it is.
Dave and Dave's mailbag is big and round. Dave says he's tired, can't lift it off the ground. He wants a light bag, likes those the best. And he likes the short mail better than the rest. And he said, well, I think that you're headed for a whole lot of letters. Well, I think that you're headed for a whole lot of letters. You're headed for a boatload of letters, and letter number 1 comes from
That's right, it's mailbag time again. And we're going a little lighter on you this time, Dave. Last time we went heavy, so we had 17 letters. This time we're only at 11. We're going to start with letter number 1, coming from Jammin' Joe in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He says, hey guys, hope all is well. Well, I got to fuel the fire yet again. In 1984, I was a junior in high school. When 1984 came out, I was in computer class, and the old DOS computers were around. And a friend of mine would listen to the Van Halen records, pause every 2 seconds, and write down the lyrics. And I added Panama and a few others, and we heard Full Blast and Top Down, so that's what we wrote. LOL, thanks for all you guys do. Love it. So then what he did was, and I thought this was kind of fun, so Joe sent me, literally, printed out in that old DOS font, his lyrics that he wrote down from high school. He also said in high school, a teacher asked us to pick a word describing ourselves that started out with the first letter of our name. So that's why he calls himself Jammin' Joe. So he had Full Blast and Top Down because that is the correct lyric. Now this is what Van Halen wrote. Hot shoe burning down the avenue, got an on-ramp coming through my bedroom. Right? We talked about this last time. This is what Joe heard and wrote down. Hot shoe burning down the avenue, I'm a lone man coming through my bathroom, which is hysterical. And then Van Halen wrote, she's blinding, I'm flying, right behind in the rear view mirror now, got the feeling, power steering, pistons popping, ain't no stopping now. But what Joe wrote was, she's mine, I'm buying, Ride behind me and we'll get real now. Got the feeling, power steering. She's departing. Please don't stop me now. Which is really kind of funny. So I thought it's really hysterical. When you hear these lyrics as a kid, I remember misinterpreting so many lyrics, and I forgot what interview it was, but one of the famous interviews with a rock star swore that Jimi Hendrix, I think it was Ozzy.
It was Ozzy.
Yeah, excuse me.
If you weren't going to bring this up,
yeah,
I was.
Excuse me while I kiss this guy, which I thought was hysterical. I always misinterpreted all of Mick Jagger's lyrics all the time. To be honest with you, I'm 54 years old. I am literally still finding out lyrics that I thought were something else. It's hysterical. But nice work, Joe. I love the homespun twist. Dave, what do you have to say?
I hope this doesn't turn into one of those topics that goes on for months.
No, I don't think so.
I think the lyrics are pretty self-explanatory. And we've talked about this before. Sometimes when Dave sings the lyrics, they're not so easy.
No.
Like, there's that one line in Ice Cream Man that everyone's always trying to figure out.
Oh, yeah.
But it's always interesting how so many different people hear the same lyric differently.
That's very true. Letter number 2 comes from Todd Foster in San Diego, California. And he says, "Hey, Dave and Dave, I can't thank you enough for the positive review of the Best of All Worlds tour. I was experiencing some hesitation on pulling the trigger, and last thing I wanted to do was see my childhood rock and roll heroes on their last leg giving us a mediocre version of themselves. After your positive review, I had to pull the trigger, and I just saw them on August 19th in Inglewood, California. Honestly, it was one of the best concerts I have been to. I could not believe that these guys were giving such a powerful performance at their age, especially Sammy at 76. He wasn't able to hit all the high notes, but for the most part, he sang the songs extremely well. Jason Bonham was awesome, Joe Satriani was absolutely incredible, and Sammy reminded us of what was truly special about Van Halen and the time he spent in the band. Because of my age, I was introduced to Van Halen once Sammy joined, and my first introduction to Van Halen was the Van Hagar era. Knowing how awesome and incredible Sammy was, I've only been able to watch the old Dave era concert footage on YouTube. After years of hearing what an incredible frontman David Lee was, I was extremely underwhelmed with his live performance. Never in the pocket with the band, and his singing was atrocious. His theatrics were good, but the concert goers were there to see and hear the band. Can you please explain what I'm missing with Dave's live shows? Was the band such a freight train that Dave's off-pitch and off-timing singing didn't matter? P.S. I absolutely love every minute of the podcast. Todd Foster, San Diego, California. Well, Todd, thank you so much for coming on board with us and listening. We really appreciate those kind words. Yes, I understand your dilemma, especially your perspective as a Van Hagar fan. Sammy's always on the money live. He actually is one of the rock stars that is very, very consistent live. Very clear, very sharp. And yes, Dave has ADD and bad, and we give him a lot of leeway, that's for sure. Dave is about a lot of energy and attitude, and yes, he's totally guilty of skipping lyrics and being distracted, for sure. But Dave is hard to explain, because he simply kind of creates an atmosphere and sort of a rock and roll environment. But I get your hesitation, especially since you didn't grow up on him, so I guess we kind of project his potential, maybe, as fans of his. I guess we give him more leeway than we should, but I do think that he is sloppy. But when he is on, he's on. He is on, but he's got to focus. He's got to focus. So I do get your hesitation there. Dave is a lot about kind of attitude and swagger and presentation, but when it comes to vocal delivery, Sam's got it all over him. What do you have to say, Dave?
I'd say the legend of David Lee Roth comes from the early Van Halen tours, which I have not seen personally, so it's hard for me to say. But from all the bootlegs I've seen and heard, and from what other people have said over the years, Dave was singing more with the band in those days. He hadn't turned into a caricature. Did I say that right? I don't think so. Of himself. He was singing on key and all sort of stuff like that. Later on, it got less and less, and he got a little too full of himself.
Oh, yeah.
And then it went downhill from there. But all I have to say, in the earlier days, when the myth of David Lee Roth hadn't taken over, he was singing with the band. He had the audience in the palm of his hand.
Yep.
He knew how to sing and be an entertainer. He knew his audience very well. They were there for the show. And a lot of Van Halen was about the show. When you hear like audio bootlegs, it's tough because you can't see what's going on. But Van Halen put on a good show too. And that's why Dave, a lot of people felt was the front man supreme. Later on, a lot of that got lost because, like you like to say, Dave was singing like a Muppet and stuff like that. But there was a reason, despite the fact he wasn't the best singer on the planet, he could still sing, and he was great for that band. And somehow the chemistry of all of them together just clicked, including a live show.
I really believe he can totally do it. I really believe he has attention deficit to a umpteenth degree because he gets so distracted by the audience and performing for them that he really should focus on his vocal presentation. Now, when Dave and I saw him in 2000 when we went to Vegas, he was pretty on. Somebody must have spoken to him because he sounded really, really good and concentrating more than he ever has. But, you know, he's a hit-or-miss guy, so it's a little bit of a mystery. Letter number 3 comes from Felipe Ernaween, and he says, "Greetings, Dave and Dave. On iTunes, on the artist page, there's a feature called Essential Albums. And not every artist has this, but many do. Top acts like Van Halen have it. I'm wondering if you know the metrics or the algorithm used for listing an album in the essential category. Van Halen's essential albums are number 1, 5150, number 2, 1984, number 3, Fair Warning, number 4, Women and Children First, number 5, Van Halen 2, and number 6, Van Halen 1. Hagar, on his iTunes page, has the following listed as essential. 3 Lock Box, Standing Hampton, Sammy Hagar, 1977. Maybe album sales, some editor preference, or chart placement. Thanks for all you do. Best, Felipe Ernaween." Well, Felipe, that is hard to determine. My guess is it must be going by streams or plays, I would imagine. But I'm going to tell you that I think it's very clear. Dave and I always talk about that Van Halen is really 2 separate bands, Van Halen and Van Hagar. So I would say the Van Halen, which is the David Lee Roth era, essentials are Van Halen 1 and 1984. I think that's pretty clear. And I would say the Sammy Hagar era is 5150 and For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. Those, I would say, are sort of the essentials. In terms of Sammy Hagar, I would say 3 Lock Box, Standing Hampton, and VOA maybe. Or I Never Said Goodbye instead of VOA. But VOA does have I Can't Drive 55. So hard to say, but those are sort of the essentials in my opinion. What do you think?
I don't think a lot of it is determined by streams because as good as Fair Warning is, it's not getting a lot of streams.
Well, also, if it's going by streams, Van Halen 1 is number 6? That's crazy.
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily in that order that he put of popularity. But, I mean, there's Mean Streets and Unchained, obviously, from Fair Warning that would probably get more than others. I'll give you an example. I think Diver Down probably has more streams than Fair Warning, and that's not listed as an essential. I mean, I love the album, but I'd be hard-pressed to say it's an essential. And Sammy Hagar's debut album, 1977, like, that's all right, but that's nothing great. And there really weren't any big hits from that one either. I really feel like it's somebody deciding that it's an essential album. I can't see it being streams.
Although that's not his debut. His debut is 9 on a 10 scale. So,
you're right. I'm sorry. My apologies. You're correct.
I hate when people do that, by the way.
Is that the Red album?
That's the Red album.
On the cover is red?
Yeah,
okay.
That's the Red.
All right. Well, there's the song Red on that album. But again, like those Capitol albums were not huge sellers, even in the streaming age. So I really can't see that one being an essential album. I'm with you. I think some of his later day albums that on the Geffen label were probably deemed more essential. But anyway, that's a long way of saying I really don't know, but my hunch is it's not just based on number of streams. I think there's some kind of manual intervention there where someone's picking what's essential.
Probably right. Letter number 4 comes from MJ in Michigan. He says, Dave's, seems like I hear about click tracks and lip syncing all the time these days. Motley Crue comes to mind. And when did click tracks hit the industry? And did Van Halen use them in the early days or ever during live performances? You brought up the keyboard recordings used during live performances last episode, which always bothered me and got me thinking about click tracks. MJ in Michigan. Well, this is interesting because, yes, they did use click tracks on keyboards only I'm always trying to determine this. So, as far as I can remember, first of all, they played live keyboards on 5150 and OU812. Then on the Fuck Tour, they had Alan Fitzgerald, I think, playing keyboards behind the curtain or something like that. But then I have to remember Balance, I think Van Halen 3 and the 2004 tour, and then also all the tours with Dave after that, like 2007, 2012, and 2015. I do believe they used click tracks with the keyboards, because Eddie didn't want to play keyboards. He didn't want to play them live. I don't know. There had to be some sort of explanation for that. It was just too much for him to switch back and forth. I don't know. I guess it was annoying, but I tell you, I don't like them. In fact, Sammy Hagar, in his recent tour, Joe Satriani brought in Ray Thistleway, who is a keyboardist and a background vocalist, and he even plays a little guitar. Sammy has even said, oh my God, the difference it makes having a live keyboardist and a background singer. He loves Ray, and he has found it to be such a key thing that has been missing from his live show, in the sense that it gives him a little bit of a vocal break, because Ray can really reinforce his vocals there, and playing with the live keyboards, he said, you're not married to the track, which is the click track you're talking about. You don't have to stay within a certain kind of framework. You can kind of move together as a band. Maybe he says like Joe takes a little extra long on his guitar solo, and everybody kind of flows with it because they're all professional musicians and they know how to move together as a band. But in terms of today, oh my God, there's a lot of click tracks, dude. And you know what? It's so sad. I almost cried one time when I saw Whitesnake, and they were using all these click tracks, and I happened to see it because I was at an angle of where I was sitting, and I could tell that all these click tracks were going off from the machines, and I could tell that they weren't coming in live. It was so disappointing. It literally soured me totally on the show, and I don't know, man. I don't like them. Motley Crue is relentless with their click tracks. In fact, Mick Mars talks about it in absolute pure disgust about how many click tracks they use. They're talking about click tracks for vocals, for bass, for all kinds of stuff. So it was just sad. But anyway, what do you think, Dave?
Well, the first thing I want to say is I find it interesting about Sammy's comments about having a live performer there doing keyboards. I agree with what he says, but Sam could have been doing that for many, many years for his solo career, but he chose not to for whatever reason after Jesse Harms left the band. After Jesse left the band, they never had a live keyboardist again, which was always interesting. I didn't know why, because, Sam could certainly afford to have somebody on stage playing live keyboards, but for some reason he never did it. As far as Van Halen goes, there was definitely click tracks going on for the keyboard songs, certainly, and there was literally a click track going for other songs too, just to keep the beats for Alex, because there'd be a click track playing in his headset to keep the beat going, because I'm not sure quite when it happened, but it definitely started happening during the David Lee Roth reunion tours, because Alex had lost so much hearing that he needed a click track to help him hear what else was going on. And I know this to be so because one time there was a bootleg that came out from the inner ear audio signal that the band used, because what people would do is they would go to the show, they would pick up I think it was like IAS, the inner audio signal or something like that. They'd pick up the signal, record it, make a bootleg out of it. And the signal's pretty good. It's almost like a soundboard. And somebody picked up Al's once, but that has its challenges because all you heard over the music, almost like this loud cowbell going, keeping the beat. It made like the bootleg almost unlistenable because it's very distracting. It's very loud on purpose.
Right.
But then somebody had the technology, and by the way, this is before AI, but somebody removed, I'll call it the loud cowbell from the bootleg so you could hear the rest of the show. But there was definitely that kind of click track going on in the background to help Al keep the beat. And the other thing I'll add was, I don't know if they had a click track for background vocals per se, but Dave and I always said that there was some shenanigans going on with the background vocals. There was some kind of audio enhancement. We're not saying that Wolf and Ed weren't singing. They were, or they probably were, but their vocals were being run through something because those guys sounded really good. And I know Wolf is a good singer. I won't take that away from him. And Ed could carry a tune. But remember, Ed had cancer.
Yeah.
And, whenever you heard him talk, it was almost like
gravelly voice.
Right. Like almost like Tom Waits or Keith Richards. Right. I mean, like that level. But then all of a sudden, when he starts singing, he's fine. It didn't quite add up. So there was something going on. And again, this is during the David Lee Roth reunion years.
Yeah, and people were, do you remember, on that 2007 tour, people were actually saying that they were piping in Michael Anthony's old vocals.
I remember that, certainly for the first reunion tour, the
first one. Yeah, the first
tour.
one. Yeah.
Right. I mean, even Michael Anthony, I was going to say alluded to that. He may have more than alluded to it, but he certainly said something. And me, I was like, I don't know. I think that's, I could tell you David Lee Roth did it on the Vegas shows we saw Dave, because he was definitely using the background vocals from the original tracks.
Oh,
from the
totally.
Van Halen songs, his solo songs.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was right. I mean, it was blatant.
It was pretty obvious, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it happens more often than we would like.
Yeah.
Background vocals are usually a given these days.
Right.
Does it get as bad as Motley Crue? Usually not that bad. But, older bands, they need that helping hand, so they do what they got to do. It's just the reality of it all.
A lot of people these days, which is okay to use, they use other singers. Like when you're an older guy, like Sam has Ray Thistleway kind of going underneath him. Billy Joel has a guy by the name of Michael Del Giudice who sings underneath. Sounds just like Billy, like a younger version of Billy, and he slips underneath him, and it's like a layer of honey underneath Billy's voice, and it smooths it all out. That's okay because it's all live. And he's another member of the band, and he's on stage, and everybody's watching him do it. No one's hiding anything. And the Beach Boys, oh, my friend, let me tell you, what a trick they got going. So you see all these old cronies in the front. I mean, old. These guys are old. They're in their 80s. And they're all lovely, but then you start hearing this gorgeous Beach Boys rich harmony, right? And you're like, I don't know if these old guys are cranking that out. The thing is that they're not piping it in with a track. But if you look at their band, because you're always focused on the guys up front, Mike Love and Bruce Johnson, all those guys, right? You start looking at all the guys in the band. They're all singing. And they have a pretty big band. It's like maybe like 8 pieces or something. And all of these guys are singing these gorgeous harmonies right behind them. But you're not watching those guys. So I was in the front row for this Beach Boys 50th reunion concert, and they had all of them up there. They had Al Jardine. They dug him up. They had everybody up there. Mike Love, Bruce Johnson. They had Brian Wilson. They're all up there. And I'm like, there's no way they're singing these. I mean, it was like they sounded gorgeous. Beautiful, beautiful, sweet Beach Boys harmonies. And the show was fantastic. Great set list, great show, huge band, like just a gargantuan band, but that band was doing a lot of work, so.
Oh, yeah, I'll give you another story. Frankie Valli.
Oh, my God.
Right, so, now I have not seen Frankie Valli, but I know people who have. And so he's on stage with the Four Seasons.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Now, the Four Seasons are young enough to be his grandchildren.
Exactly.
Never mind his children.
Literally,
right? His grandchildren. They're all good-looking guys.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, and they move well.
They are carrying him through that show with background vocals.
Right.
But it's worse than that because if you believe, I think it was the New York Post, so take it or leave it.
Yeah.
But he's having trouble lip-syncing these days.
Oh, I know.
Because he couldn't even lip sync through the song.
Yep.
And so it's obvious like the song is still going and he's not keeping up. So like who's singing, right?
Right.
So he's having trouble. Now, I mean, the guy is, he's over 80 now.
Way over.
He may be pushing 90, I think, at this point.
Yeah.
So, sometimes you have to ask yourself, do you need to keep going or not? But having said that, I just saw Judy Collins in concert. She's 85.
Yeah.
I mean, she didn't sound like she did when she was in her 20s.
No.
But let me tell you, she pulled it off. She was phenomenal, and you knew she wasn't using backing tracks.
Right.
She wasn't lip syncing because she would tell stories and then start singing in the middle of the story.
Yeah.
And she sounded like Judy Collins. Did she hit every note? No, but she was still, and we were like, damn, she's 85, still singing, still playing guitar. The only guitarist in her band, she's playing guitar. And so, sometimes you take care of your voice, you can do it. Other times you need some help. I mean, I think we've over discussed this topic, but we're turning into Eddie Trunk now.
Yeah, I know.
But what can I tell you? You have the technology available to you, and lots of artists use that technology, and they'll tour as long as they can because they can't make any money selling music anymore.
That's right.
So they got to do it touring.
That's right. And you know what? I just interviewed Judy Collins, Dave, not too long ago, a couple months ago. And,
okay.
Yeah, and rumor was that you even got wood at that show.
I did. But that's when Rufus Wainwright was on stage.
Oh, that's a whole other story for another podcast.
You were close, but no cigar.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, if you go to see Frankie Valli, it should be called Frankie Valli's Hairpiece and the Four Seasons. That's what the
Yeah, look, everyone's got to make a living. I get
know.
it. But like at some point, you got to call.
Oh, it is really bad. Anyway, letter number 5 comes from your buddy, Dave, Jim Vonvus. He comes here, he says, hey, it's your buddy Jim Vonvus. I just finished the last podcast, and as usual, I can't wait for the next one. Wanted to add a few things to some of the topics you guys discussed. Number 1, Nuno's Bumblebee was painted by a member of the VH fan community. Actually, a legend in the Van Halen fan community, Craig Stofko from the CHS Custom Guitars. Craig is an old friend. He did a few guitars for me, so I feel like he deserves his name being mentioned. He actually painted 2 N4s for Nuno. The one you usually see and the second one with 2 pickups. Both painted the same colors. Number 2, the discussion of 5150 versus E5150. I think they have nothing to do with each other. Sabbath's E5150 is code for the word evil. If you take the numbers in that phrase and switch them with Roman numeral numbers, it's E, 5 meaning V, 1 meaning I, and 50 meaning L. It spells out evil. And he says, a huge fan from the beginning of the podcast. I'm sorry I missed you guys at the Sammy show. I was in work hell all week. Long live the mighty Van Halen. Jim Vonvus. So thanks, Jim. It's always great to hear from you. And Jim is a longtime listener, but also a friend of Dave's because he is in Halen CT. Is that the name of the band, Dave? Halen CT?
Yes.
He does a great job. Letter number 6 comes from Brandon Wall, Dave. He is back and with a vengeance. He says here, hey, Dave and Dave, a while ago I wrote to you guys about how Eddie played a riff of Wilson Pickett's cover of In the Midnight Hour on both MTV's Matt Rock Van Halen 3 special in 1998 with Matt Pinfield, as well as David Letterman's late night talk show. Now, I have found a live recording of Van Halen playing In the Midnight Hour from 4 minutes and 3 seconds to 5 minutes during their 2007-2008 semi-reunion tour with David Lee Roth as their singer in a tour stop in Pengrowth Saddle Dome in Calgary, Canada. And here is a clip. It's not much. It's not the elusive studio version In the Midnight Hour recorded for 1984, but it's a rare gem, a rare treat for any diehard Van Halen fanatic. And I want to hear your thoughts on the recording. Let me know what you think. Stay frosty. Happy trails, Brandon, a.k.a. Chocolate Slim Wall. Okay, Brandon. Well, the clip that we just played is so bizarre because, yes, Brandon's right. Dave is singing In the Midnight Hour. Eddie is not playing the music for In the Midnight Hour. He's playing some sort of like blues jam thing, but it's a little bizarre, and I don't know what to make of it. It's bizarre. It's like a little tease, and I would just love to hear that recording because I know it's probably badass. Dave, what do you think?
Oh, yeah. That's on the bucket list of unreleased Van Halen songs we want to hear. But, maybe that is the way they played the studio song, because it could have been one of those things like Dancing in the Streets where the music was almost nothing like the original track, and all they kept was the vocal melody. Who knows? Maybe Dave started singing the song live, and Ed's like, well, I'm just going to jam behind this because I don't remember that one at all.
Yeah.
Go figure. But, yeah, it's one of those curiosities.
Yep.
And maybe one day they'll share it with the world. We can only hope.
My question is, and this is really where it teeters. First of all, I think had they put anything out for 1984, they probably would have done it for the 40th anniversary, which was last winter, number one. Number two, is it in the Warner Brothers vaults, or is it at the 5150 vaults?
Oh, it's probably at 5150.
Yeah, that's what I figured. So, letter number 7 comes from Matthew Bowes. And he says, I got to thinking about the ending of Van Halen Rising, and I think you're right. It should end with Mo Austin signing the band. The boys all look at each other with a sense of happiness, and let's fucking go. It fades to black with Mike's bass thumping the intro to Running with the Devil. Alex chimes in, and then Eddie starts up as though the credits roll. And there's pictures of the guys through the 1978 tour. Hope it happens. Thank you, Matthew Bowes. What Matthew is talking about is he's following up on a conversation we had on our last mailbag about Greg Renoff's book, Van Halen Rising, which was optioned for either a movie or a TV show. And we're saying, oh, wait a minute, when are you going to show Van Halen? It's basically the rise of Van Halen, how Van Halen formed and how they became Van Halen and how it should really go up to when they get signed. So it's the rise, Van Halen Rising. How did they get to become Van Halen? Well, I tell you, I can't wish for this enough, and I'll tell you why, because I really think it would be a massive game changer for Van Halen's legacy. It could be reintroducing a new generation to the band. This is how bands get big beyond their life. I'll give an example. Queen is a perfect example of that. Now, don't get me wrong. I know Queen still exists technically because Brian May is touring with Roger Taylor and he goes out with Adam Lambert and stuff. Dave, can you imagine if Queen was still together? They'd be doing stadiums. I mean, they would be gargantuan.
Oh, for sure. Oh. But I wonder if they would still be that big if Freddie was still alive.
Well, that's a good question. That's a very, very good question. Part of the lore is Freddie passing, but obviously we all know Freddie was incredible, just one of the all-time greatest in history. But their catalog is beautiful. They have a beautifully strong catalog. They have a great story, great history. So does Van Halen. Van Halen has a great catalog. Van Halen has a great story. And let me tell you something. If this is done right, this could be huge. It really, really could. And let me tell you, it has all the interesting elements beyond the music. This is what's cool. It's got interesting characters. It's got interesting story. Ed and Al coming from another country, learning the English language, coming here. Mike's coming from Detroit. Dave's coming from Indiana. They're all living in California. Dave's from a rich family. Ed and Al from a poor family. It's just, there's so many interesting elements to it, and they're just misfits, and they don't really get along. A lot of tension. And let me tell you, if you did have a Van Halen Rising, and it came out good, it should be like a Hulu series or something. And if it was successful, no joke, I'm not even being funny here, you could do different series, and I'll tell you how. Van Halen Rising, the Greg Renoff book, understandable, great series. If that was huge and successful, you could do another series, the second season, called The Mighty Van Halen. The Roth years, you go through the Roth years, and then you can go through the Van Hagar years, call it Van Halen Returns, whatever you want to do it. Go through the whole thing. They have such an interesting story in addition to the music. Like, all the different characters are interesting. The story is interesting. It literally runs like a soap opera. You know, Sammy's in. They're huge with Sammy. Sammy's out. The whole Gary Sharon, Mitch Malloy, bizarre scenario. David Lee Roth is back. No, he's not. Mitch Malloy is in. Not really. Now Gary Sharon. Then it's a bomb. Then they try to get Dave back, but they can't, so they get Sam back. Eddie's falling off the wagon. There's a lot of cool stuff there, but you'd have to do it right. If it's not done right, it'll be horrible. But you got to do it right. All that aside, that's pie in the sky stuff. If they just did Van Halen Rising, it would be great. It really would. And I hope for Greg's sake, too, because Greg did a great job researching that book. It's a great book. If you have not read it, what the hell are you doing? Go get it right now. It's required reading for our listeners. Van Halen Rising by Greg Runoff. You got to read that book. So interesting. What do you think, Dave? What's your thoughts on that?
I think they could do that. I think what may happen is, I don't know if they would stop at their signing. They may go all the way to like 1984.
Maybe.
Kind of similar to like what they did with the Queen movie.
Yeah,
they went to about Live Aid, right?
To their height,
you go to the end of the David Lee Roth era and then stop there. I know they're going to cut out a lot, but for a big movie like that, you know, they're going to hit the drama highlights.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm sure the big
that's
strokes.
My educated guess, but we'll see.
Letter number 8 comes from Ricky Chan from Seattle, and he says, I absolutely love your podcast. Regarding episode 103, you guys did an amazing job fact-checking Sammy and calling out his outlandish claims and lack of respect for classic Van Halen. However, I was surprised no one mentioned that his tour logo has blatantly copied the classic Van Halen logo with the SH stylized similarly. How pathetic. I recently rewatched the 1983 South America shows on YouTube. The set list is incredible, especially Beer Drinkers and Hellraisers, the extended version of Somebody Get Me a Doctor that includes Girl Gone Bad Jam and Cream's I'm So Glad. This is peak Van Halen at its funnest. You guys should definitely do a review of his concert, and the South America shows need to be officially released on Blu-ray. Would definitely put to bed Dave or Sammy question permanently. Keep up the great work. Ricky Chan from Seattle. Well, Ricky, yes, we actually did discuss the logo, not on that episode though. Dave and I talked about it. I'm gonna say somewhere around February, March, when they announced the shows going on sale, because that's when the logo came out. We discussed it. The logo that they're mocking is the Van Halen logo, but they literally lifted the logo they used for the 2004 reunion tour with Sam. We put it side by side, and we were like, holy shit. I mean, they really, ripped it off, right, Dave?
Right. I remember we talked about that a couple of times.
Yeah.
When the show was first announced and we saw the logo.
Yes.
And somebody else, I think it was on the links, had noticed, hey, this is pretty close to the 2004 tour with the flames and all that.
Oh, the coloring,
and
everything.
Interestingly, the logo changed somewhere along the way because the bottom part of the logo is now a stylized SH for Sammy Hagar. Mm-hmm. But before that, it looked a little more like a V and an H for Van Halen. And so Dave and I were wondering, did that hit too close to home? Mm-hmm. And, Al or whomever called Sam and was like, dude, that's a step too far.
Yeah.
And so they changed it. But that logo at best is borrowed.
Oh, for sure.
Just put it that way.
Yeah. And in terms of the South America tour, we will definitely do an episode on that for sure. I know Dave would love to do that because he's a big fan of those shows. And oh my God, would that make a great box set, right, Dave?
Oh my God. I love the 1983 South American shows. In fact, the Montevideo, Uruguay show is arguably my favorite Van Halen bootleg of all time.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And those guys were on. They were doing lots of covers. Mm-hmm. The shows there were professionally recorded.
Yeah.
A lot of them were broadcast on TV,
right?
Which was not something you saw before that.
No.
Like Van Halen shows were not broadcast on TV, but in South America they were, or they were broadcast on the radio. So there's like quite a few high-quality bootlegs from that tour. So you're getting high-quality performances from the band sound-wise, but also performance-wise, because for whatever reason, they were really firing on all cylinders for that mini tour. And if you believe their dearly departed manager, Noel Monk, it was from his book. It was because they were playing more than one show, so the guys had time to relax. So as a result of being more relaxed, they were doing better performances and they were getting along and things like that. I say if you believe Noel Monk, because subsequent to that, I forget who it was, but somebody else who was close to the band had said, yeah, no, they were not really as chummy on that part of the tour as you think they were. So again, it's like, who the heck knows? But all I know is that those South American performances are great. And if you can get your hands on them, you should certainly listen to them. And I personally like I said, the Montevideo Uruguay show. You want to get the complete Montevideo Uruguay show because there's various different bootlegs out there of that tour. Yeah, great stuff. And a box set, I'd be the first one to buy it.
Absolutely.
Blu-ray would be tough because I don't know how good the quality is.
Yeah.
And do they even have the original video recordings? Are they locked up in some South American TV station vault? Or is the TV station even still around? I mean, who the heck knows what's going on there? But would I love to see that happen? Absolutely.
Awesome. Letter number 9 is an interesting one. It comes from Jeff Shrewsbury, and Jeff sent us this incredible printout sheet from 1999, and I'm going to read this to you. So he said, I printed this out from the official Van Halen website years ago when it was current info, 1999. Recently, while cleaning out some stuff, I came across it, and I had kept it in a box with some other stuff. As I understood it, Van Halen 4 was pretty much done, and Warner Brothers rejected it, leading Sharon to amicably depart. Point is, there are completed songs in the vault, along with many other songs I have sent in, as well as other listeners. I had other Van Halen stuff in that box, but this one seemed the most relevant. Jeff Shrewsbury. Now I'm going to read you what he sent us. This is the last update, August 20th, 1999. On vocals, Gary Sharon. Guitar, Eddie Van Halen. Bass, Michael Anthony. Drums, Alex Van Halen. This is like a rundown. Tracks with working titles, Left for Dead, River Wide, Say Uncle, You Wear It Well, Rock and Roll Cliche, I Want Her Anyway, More Than Yesterday, Love Again, Miss You Much. Producer Danny Korchmar. Management Ray Daniels. Additional notes, Danny has a very hands-on approach. He was a lot of fun to work with, and we're all really excited to be working with him. This is a quote from Eddie. Patrick Leonard handled production on 2 of the songs. More than 20 songs have been written to date, and then they also noted some notes about the songs. Left for Dead is a 4 on the floor, one of the most up-tempo songs the band has done. This is according to Gary. Then he said River Wide, groovy with a dark edge. Engineer Rob Stieglitz on that. Then he says, Say Uncle. It's about a dominant woman and a willing, submissive man. From Gary. And he said that pre-production begins on August 19th. And the You Wear It Well. This song features a stellar tapping intro and sounds like an extraterrestrial on acid. So what this is back in 1999, Van Halen was actually being more proactive on the web, giving their fans more updates as to what was going on with the band. This is very rare for Van Halen because they never did stuff like that. They were so secretive all the time.
Hard to believe, right?
It's shocking. It really is shocking, but you can tell that they're almost experimenting with the web because, you know, the web was obviously in full swing at this point, but I don't know if maybe they wanted to get people more amped for the Gary version of the band, and maybe they felt like they weren't vocal enough, or somebody must have given them some sort of, hey, listen, if you're going to do this, you got to keep in touch with your fans and get them hyped for this. So somebody must have told them, this is what happens today. Bands talk to their fans, they give them updates as to what's going on with the album, and they're like trying that. So that stuff that I just read to you was public information on the Van Halen website, which Jeff at the time printed out and kept. Now, if you can never find that anywhere, which is kind of cool that Jeff sent it to us, and it's a rarity. But yes, there is an album out there. It's not finished. It's raw demos, but where the hell it is, who the hell knows? What did you make of this, Dave?
Great stuff. And I always wonder if that's stuff I knew at the time but have now subsequently forgotten because there's just so much out there. But that is crazy that they were really going that in depth, giving people heads up about what the album was going to be. And I think you're right. I think they were starting to listen to other people because I think they had lost a lot of their fans with Van Halen 3. And even with Van Halen 3, they were doing things they normally hadn't done before. They recorded some live shows for the 3 tour, like the one in Australia. And there was one in Pennsylvania that they had recorded that they were going to release. But then Gary was out of the band, so that got shelved, which seems to be a somewhat recurring theme in Van Halen land. But having said that, yeah, they were really trying to be proactive at the time. But unfortunately, Gary left the band. And like you said, somebody's got those songs. I'm sure Michael Anthony has them. Michael Anthony, I think, has like almost everything. He'll never let it out, at least while he's alive.
Here's what I like to know.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if this stuff was circulated, and I think it was, like at Warner Brothers, like maybe somehow it will leak one day, because it did circulate a bit as to kind of getting their interest, but I don't know how much it did. I think maybe one day we could hear that stuff. Maybe, because somebody must have a copy of it.
Oh, yeah. Somebody at Warner Brothers or Eddie Trunk said he heard it. Now, I don't know if he has a copy, but he certainly heard it. It's out there.
Eddie Trunk heard it and said it was fantastic, and he said it was far better than Van Halen 3, because Van Halen 3 definitely was more of a Eddie Van Halen, Gary Cherone side project as it was a Van Halen album. It wasn't really an Eddie Van Halen solo album either, but here's the other thing interesting, Dave. So, I don't know if I ever told you this. So, I got to interview Danny Korchmar for some sort of project. I think it was the Immediate Family, his band that he was doing. And I knew about this. So I asked him about it. Like, you know, were you going to produce the Van Halen album with the Irish Ron? And he sort of like backed off on it. And he was like, yeah, no. I spent a couple of days at 5150 tooling around with Ed. It wasn't that big a deal. And I was like, It was a little weird, like, the way he answered me, you know? I wanted to kind of expand on it and put it here on the podcast, but he, like, fluffed it off and didn't want to talk about it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I have a feeling it was an album that he produced that was rejected, and he doesn't want to talk about it.
Maybe.
Who knows? So, very curious. Letter number 10 comes from, your brother from another mother, Dave, Simiak Solo Jew. He says, greetings, brothers, how are you? And he says, about the Black Sabbath E5150. The title is based on the Roman numerals, and the Roman numerals V represents 5, I represents 1, L represents 50. You add the letter E in front of it, you have the word evil. According to various Black Sabbath members, it is the original way it was meant to be. In one interview, Ronnie said, it's Ronnie James Dio, it was Geezer's idea to put the word evil in the form of a number. And he said, again, Geezer's the man. Simiak Soloju from Tehran, Iran. So, that is another backing version as to why the E5150 exists as opposed to any other tie in there. So what do you make of that?
Well, I think we hit on this before.
Yeah.
And I didn't really address it with the last one, but I had no idea that's what it stood for. But I'm not that big of a Black Sabbath fan, so I didn't know that. But I guess it's just coincidence that they both had 5150 in a song, and that's that. It's just a coinky-dink, and looks like the songs have nothing to do with each other.
Letter number 11, the last letter of the night. Dave's absolute favorite comes from Christian McKay. Christian says, in response to Kentucky Todd's letter about the telephone ringing in the solo of House of Pain, I can definitely hear something. There's an overtone, a sympathetic harmonic that seems to happen 3 times at a regular interval. And I'm making an argument that it is possible for that sound to be a telephone. The first piece of evidence is that the guitar pickups can be microphonic and transmit ambient sounds. An example of this is the scene in the Freddie Mercury movie where Brian May talks to the control booth through his pickups. I do the same thing with my weekend dad band, and if we were trying to figure out a song, I'll hold up my phone to the pickups and the song comes out the amp. Second piece of evidence, on several occasions, Ed said he hated wearing headphones in the studio, and he would often cut overdubs and solos from the control room. If there was a phone in the control room, the kind we grew up with that had actual bells on them that was smacked with magnetic controlled clapper, that phone was on a desk near Ed's guitar, and it is possible that the sound would get picked up. I have been a listener since day one, and I am always amazed at how you come up with great content month after month. And to my fellow Dave and Dave listeners, if we can't argue about the lyrics of Panama or whether or not Alex overdubbed the Hot for Teacher intro for over a year, surely we can keep this up for a few months. Sincerely, I81B for you in 406, Christian McKay. Well, Christian, I have to be honest, I cannot hear that goddamn phone. I have tried so many times in headphones. I feel like there's too much going on in the track to pick it up. I'm sure you as a musician could pick it up way better than me. But my question is, if there was a phone in the control room and Don Landy was the engineer, I can't imagine he wouldn't have taken it off the hook or at least put it on mute. So that is shocking to me, especially if he was in the middle of working with Ed. What do you think, Dave?
You know, I wonder if it's just something the way Ed played his guitar.
Could be.
If he just played his guitar a certain way and that made the sound, or, you know, there's multiple guitar tracks going in there, the way the guitars are layered on top of each other or bouncing off each other or whatever, and it just makes this strange sound that maybe sounds like a telephone if you're listening close enough. I mean, I don't know. I'm not an engineer. Maybe some people are hearing something funky going on there, but that wouldn't surprise me because Ed was always experimenting with all sorts of stuff. You know, if he would always say, if it sounded good to him, then it was good enough.
Yep.
It didn't matter if, you know, you were sticking strictly to some musical scale or some musical rule or whatever. So maybe that's it.
That's
or
true.
maybe the phone just rang in the background.
It very well could be.
Who the heck knows,
That's
right?
true.
Yeah, I don't know. That's another question to ask Al or Wolf.
That's the truth. Well, that wraps up the mailbag segment. And we are on to our interview with Brad Snitzer. He is one of our listeners. He's one of you guys. And Brad had a very unique experience. In fact, I should say experiences. He has gone to the rock and roll fantasy camp with Michael Anthony, Vic Johnson, Steve Vai, and Sammy Hagar, and he talks about all the different things that go on inside those rock and roll camps when you spend it with the rock stars and what goes on there. He's a very nice guy, loyal listener, and gave us a real detailed account of what that's like. He had multiple experiences, and it was really, really cool. So we get into that with him, but we also have a breakdown of what Dave and I have been working on for a while called Dave and Sam by the Numbers. What the hell is this? Well, we break down Dave and Sam by the numbers in terms of matching each other up. Like how many hits this one had, how many hits that one had, how many albums sold this one had, how many albums this one's, how many tour dates did this one do, tour dates did that one do, whose reunion tour did better, what would their post Van Halen albums perform like, all the side-by-side comparisons in many different capacities for Sam versus Dave. And it's not so much who's better, who's this, it gives you a feeling about the measuring up of Dave and Sam. Everybody's just like, oh, Dave's better. Well, I understand everybody has their own opinions about who's the better performer singer. We're not talking about that. We're talking about numbers. Who racked up certain amounts of numbers? For example, Sammy had 4 number 1 albums. Where did Dave's albums land? You know, chart comparisons, single comparisons, album comparisons. Whose live album did better? Whose Van Halen reunion tour did better? You know, all that kinds of stuff. So it's going to be really interesting. I think you guys get a kick out of it. Dave gets very charged up when he does a Dave versus Sam thing. We've been working on this one for a while, so I think you guys are going to enjoy that. And that is all coming up next. Take a listen.
The ideal, like in a movie, is that you're always thinking about the arena stage, and that's the only thing that's on your mind as you're working as a musician. That greater idea is always there looming consciously. Where I don't think it was that for us. It certainly wasn't for me. It went in very short little stages, like one day I'm going to be the king of Gazaris.
Right.
One day we'll be the top guys at the Starwood.
Hey, with us it started out with one day we went to practice piano. Right? From there it went to, okay, he started playing guitar, I started playing drums, then we swapped because he had better on drums than me, and it went on from there. But you're right, it was small steps. It wasn't this big dream that we had. It was basically the need to survive.
Check out the new podcast, The Rock Quarry, your place to hear in-depth interviews with some of rock's most colorful characters, with your host, entertainment journalist David J. Criblay. The Rock Quarry is available for free on Spreaker and iTunes. You can check us out on Facebook at The Rock Quarry Podcast, on Twitter at Rock Quarry Pod, on Instagram at The Rock Quarry Podcast, or email us at therockquarrypodcast@gmail.com. Take a trip to the rock concerts of the 80s in this new full-color 300-page book, Pictures Alive, filled with never-before-seen photos. Go back and see the mighty Van Halen at their peak from two amazing concerts in 1982 and 1984, plus photos from Sammy Hagar and David Lee Roth solo tours, and many other bands of the day. Filled with amazing photos, classic stories, original ticket stubs, and more. If you're a fan of Van Halen, you will not be disappointed. Hit the ground running with Pictures Alive, the new book, now available at picturesalive.net. That's picturesalive.net. picturesalive.net. Get it today.
Hey, everybody, this is Sass Jordan, and you are listening to Dave and Dave Unchained.
If you would like to send us a letter asking a question or making a statement or whatever you'd like to say, you can send it to ddunchainedpodcast@gmail.com. Need a laugh? Check out the Funny How Comedy Podcast, which focuses on upbeat conversations with legendary comedians. It's free on Spreaker and iTunes. Check us out on Facebook at Funny How Comedy Podcast, on Twitter at Funny How Podcast, on Instagram at Funny How Comedy Podcast, or email us at funnyhowcomedypodcast@gmail.com.
Listen how I talk. Where do you think I learned this kind of rhythm? I have a surgically implanted disco beat, man. It's like I got it from radio. My whole life is on 78 RPM, which coincidentally was what those first batch of records I got were.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have a great guest this evening. He is one of our listeners who had a very unique experience with some members of Van Halen. It is Brad Snitzer. Brad, how are you?
I'm doing great and thrilled to be here.
Awesome. It's great to talk to you. Brad, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where are you from?
So I am born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, and I still reside in St. Louis. Just like the two of you, I have been a Van Halen fan since the late 70s, and they've always been my number one go-to. I sent you a picture of the tattoo I got last July of Eddie as my tribute to him.
That's right. That's right.
It is now Van Halen for life.
Awesome. That's great. And how long have you been listening to the cast?
I want to say at least 2.5 years. Very early on when you started, I just happened to find you on Spotify.
Okay.
And I have a routine where I listen to your podcast when I work out. They're long enough that I fill my week of workouts listening to the 3 hours.
That's great. Well, thank you for doing that. And thank you for being such a dedicated listener. So Brad has experienced a unique scenario. So Brad has experienced going to the rock and roll fantasy camp. And you've done it a few times and with a few different Van Halen members. So why don't we start off with the latest and the greatest, which is you played with Michael Anthony of Van Halen. So where was the camp?
So the camp was in Los Angeles.
Okay.
And we got to play with him at a studio in Hollywood. So whenever you go to a rock and roll fantasy camp, they assign a rock star as your counselor or mentor. And mine for this camp was Vinny Appice from Black Sabbath and Dio. And we got the opportunity. And 100 other bands. He actually played with John Lennon when he was in high school. And we got to play Panama with Michael Anthony. And the reason we chose Panama is the theme of the camp was the 40th anniversary of the 1984 album.
Oh, okay.
So we chose to play Panama. There's a few other people played other songs like Somebody Get Me a Doctor, Ain't Talking About Love, Running with the Devil. So, but we figured we'd pull one right off of 1984.
That's great. And what instrument do you play?
I'm a guitar player. I am an amateur basement garage guitar player who got bit by the Van Halen bug and have been chasing it ever since.
And how long was the camp?
So the camps run from a Thursday to a Sunday night, and you get to perform out at a venue. We actually played at the Whiskey A Go-Go with Sebastian Bach, and then we did another show at the Viper Room. So it goes from a Thursday to a Sunday.
Oh, wow. How was Sebastian?
It was great. It's funny, the night before we were supposed to perform with him, we were hanging out in the lobby, and all of a sudden we turn and see Sebastian walking in carrying a glass of wine. I don't know where he got it from, what restaurant he left, or maybe he just carries a glass of wine with him. He kind of did his stumbling in and hey, everybody, how you doing? And went up to his room, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what are we in for tomorrow? But he couldn't be nicer. Was fantastic to play with.
He's fantastic. He's one of my all-time favorites. He's just like such a blast anytime you see him. I can just see him walking in the lobby being like, dudes, are we playing tomorrow?
What you envisioned was exactly what he did.
You guys ready to rock with Sebastian Bach? He's so funny. He's such a character. And you know what? He always brings it. He's got great energy and he's got great pipes. So, you know, he's always...
And he's still at 50, I think 56. Don't quote me on that. But he sounds like he did in his 20s. I mean, he still has it.
Well, it's because he actually learned how to properly take care of his voice and properly sing. That's one thing that Sebastian has over a lot of people is he came from a background where he learned how to properly sing. Because there's a lot of people who don't properly sing and they blow their voices out. But he had Broadway training and all kinds of choral training. So he knows exactly how to eat, drink, and rest his voice. He knows all the different tricks of what you have to do in order to have longevity with your voice. A voice is something you really got to take care of when you have it. I know that my wife's a vocal teacher, but in addition to that, I have interviewed Sebastian before. And although he sounds like he lives on cigarettes and coffee the way he talks, it's just the raspiness of his voice. His singing voice is in great shape. So he really, and he even sets up his set so that each song warms up his voice. Like he won't do like Slave to the Grind right at the top of the set because his voice is not ready for that yet. He's got to warm it up. So he's got a whole procedure. So now, does everybody get to play with Michael Anthony or do you have to request to play with Michael Anthony?
So the way it works is they will announce the camps several months ahead and they announce the headliners. So at this camp, our headliners were Michael Anthony, Sebastian Bach, Warren DeMartini from Rat, and Tommy Aldrich from Whitesnake and Ozzy.
That's a great lineup.
You just sign up, and then they take all of the participants, and usually will break you up into bands of 5 or 6. They get a drummer, a bass player. Normally, there's always too many guitar players, so you'll have 2 or 3 guitar players per band, and then you have a singer.
Right.
And you get there on that Thursday. Usually, you'll do a Zoom meeting a week before to kind of meet your band members and start talking about song ideas so you can start working on those songs.
Okay.
But when you get there on Thursday, you hit the ground running. I mean, we walked into a studio. We literally just met in person. And 3 hours later, we had to play with Tommy Aldrich.
Wow.
So you got to really get it together. But it's an experience for people of all levels. I mean, I went to my very first camp. We had a guitar player who literally just picked it up. And believe it or not, we played Ain't Talking About Love. And we just had him do the A minor and the G. So he was very much participating with the band. So you don't have to be an expert musician. You can be an amateur like myself, or you can be a beginner. They even have a package for non-musicians. If you just want to be in the room with these people, get a picture and get something signed. So there is opportunities for everybody at these rock and roll fantasy camps.
That's wild.
Well, then sign me up because that's the league I'm in.
That's
yes.
And what does this typically run? Is it expensive? How much does it run?
So it depends on the camps. Usually you're looking around $5,000, but I would say with all the camps that I've been to, I usually tell people it's literally the ultimate meet and greet.
Wow.
Because, for me, when I went to the second camp and Vic Johnson was my counselor, I was literally eating meals and taking Ubers with Vic.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a moment, that camp, I got to play with Zach Wilde. And we were thinking of songs to play with Zach. And I said, why don't we do Stand Up and Shout from the movie Rockstar? Nobody else will be doing that. And all of a sudden, Vic says to me, I wrote that song. I said, what are you talking about? He said, yeah, I wrote Stand Up and Shout. Sammy put it on his For Sale album.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh my God, I totally forgot that. And here I am in the room with the guy that wrote the song that ended up in the movie. So you just get those types of moments that you'll get nowhere else when it comes to exposing yourself to the rock and roll community and your heroes.
That's so cool. I'm so glad
when
to hear
you were
that.
in the cab with Vic, did you hit him up 20 questions about Sam?
You know what? I didn't hit him up too bad, but I'm sitting in this Uber thinking to myself, this Uber driver has no idea who is in his car right now. And I would have to tell you, Vic Johnson is the most humble musician I've ever met. I mean, you've got a guy that's not only playing all of Sammy's songs, he's playing all the Van Halen songs, and he's very humble about everything. And I'm thinking, you're an incredible guitar player, and he's very humble. So he's very personable. Again, we had a couple meals together. We were in the studio working on songs. I got a great video at the Whiskey. We played Running with the Devil, and we shared the solo, and there's a great picture of just me and him facing each other playing that solo that I took a screenshot, blew it up, and it's hanging up on the wall.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Nice.
And now poor Vic is driving an Uber because Sammy kicked him out of the band. He's not out of the band. I'm kidding. I'm just saying because he's doing the tour with Satriani. We love Vic. Vic is a very cool guy. I saw Vic, oh my God, 1,000,000 years ago with the Bus Boys. How do you like that? His old band, the boys are back in town. Yeah, so that's
right.
really cool. So now, is there some sort of protocol? Are you allowed to talk to these guys and ask them questions and get stuff signed, get a photo? Are you allowed to do all that stuff?
Absolutely. So it's interesting. The way the last camp with Michael Anthony worked, they started with a Q&A.
Okay.
So they did a really good Q&A, and it's interesting. I want to say in your last podcast, you had a listener send in a question about, will Michael Anthony write a book?
Right.
And that was a question that somebody asked at the Q&A, and his response was, I'll let everyone else get their books out first.
Well, you know what? It's so funny that you said that because I remember that letter, and I remember Dave and I saying, well, maybe if Alex puts out a book and then Dave already has a book out and Sam already has a book out and, Mike might feel a little more comfortable putting out a book after everybody else has had their say. I'm not looking for dirt. You know what I mean? I'm just saying I really think that Michael's book would be very, very interesting because he had such a unique position in between. He wasn't Dave and he wasn't Eddie and he wasn't Alex the brother. He had a unique position and he's very kind of straight up, Mike. Mike doesn't make stuff up. I know he's very nice and stuff, but you don't have to throw dirt. I'm just talking about what happened. You know what I mean? So and talk about the music. There's so many interesting things to talk to Michael Anthony about. I mean, I'm sure that there's plenty of dirt questions that everybody wants to know. So what kind of questions did they ask him at the Q&A? What else were they asking him?
Oh, it was interesting. A lot of the questions were for Van Halen fans, things we already know. Talking about being with Van Halen, what it was like on the tours. There was discussion and questions about the upcoming tour and getting ready for that and what they're doing and how they're getting in the studio and ironing everything out.
Right.
So I wouldn't say anything that we don't already know came up, but it was really neat to do the Q&A. So then when we got a chance to play with him, I walk in the room and it takes a few minutes for, all the guitars to be hooked up, amps to be turned on. So I'm standing there. First thing that was really surprising to me is how short he is.
Yes, he's small.
He really is. I'm 5'6", 5'7" on a good day, and I was taller than him. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I never realized all those years looking at you on stage.
Yeah.
You think they're these big rock gods. I'm taller than you.
Yeah, it's true.
So I'm standing there, and Michael is standing in front of me, and I had to find something to say, but nothing embarrassing. So I tried to name drop with him. So I told him when I was in college, I worked for the local concert promoter here in St. Louis, and I name dropped the concert promoter, and he's like, oh yeah, I remember him. He used to make sure that we had lobster. And I said, where would you go for the lobster? He's like, no. He'd make sure we had lobster backstage at all of our shows.
That's amazing.
And then I said, would you mind sharing the mic with me? Because I backup sing. I'm not a lead singer, but I'm happy to do backup. I actually enjoy doing backup while I'm playing guitar.
Right.
And I just said, would you mind when we're playing, sharing the mic with me on one of the choruses so we can get a really good picture? And he said, absolutely. So we started playing the song. Obviously, we get to the first chorus, and he's standing right next to me. We share the mic. And then we get to the second chorus, and he's standing right next to me, sharing the mic.
Wow.
He ended up standing with me the entire song.
Wow.
I mean, at one moment, I will admit, I flubbed up one part of the song, but it was because here I am standing with Michael Anthony of Van Halen playing Panama. It's really hard to concentrate when you really think about what's happening in that moment.
Sure.
Fortunately, no one knew my flub.
Yeah.
Because what did Eddie say? When you make a mistake, make it twice. They'll think you intended to do it.
Right, exactly.
So I got through the song, but no, I was walking on cloud nine. God, I think I still am because I have pictures hanging up in my office. And then after we played, you do get your picture with him. You get individual pictures. You get a group photo of the whole band.
Wow.
And then when I worked for the concert promoter, they used to have me file the extra promo pics after a band came in town and they played and they're gone. They'd always have those extra concert promo pics. And it was my job to file them. And I opened that file cabinet, and there are all those bands with promo pics. And I'm thinking to myself, they're not going to miss one. So I actually took some of the Van Halen old promo pics, and I brought my 1984 promo pic.
Whoa.
And I handed it to him to sign, and he looks at me going, wow, this is really old. And I said, yeah it's from 1984.
Yeah.
So I've got his signature now on my 1984 promo pic.
That's awesome, man. That's killer.
It's priceless.
Yeah, he loves stuff like that. In fact, you know what Mike used to love? He used to love when fans would give him Van Halen bootlegs. He loved it. He used to collect them. And it became a thing where fans would send him copies of bootlegs, and he had a whole, I don't know if he still has it, but he had a whole collection of them. And he got off on it because it's you have to realize bootlegs to him are like photographs. You know what I mean? They're old memories. So he has an attachment to all those. So that was really, really cool. So I would imagine he didn't disappoint, right? He sounded like he was really fun and interesting.
You know what? He was, and you never know when you walk in if these artists are into it or not into it. He couldn't have been nicer. He was very gracious. He was signing whatever anyone put in front of him.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it was the best experience with him that I could have had. I mean, obviously, I would have loved to have spent more time with him and maybe played another song or talked to him more. But just the experience of being able to play that song with him after all these years, it is an incredible experience. And I got to see Kevin Doogie, his bass tech. So at my very first camp where I played with Sammy Hagar, at every rock camp, they have a crew chief because they have an actual crew to help move amps. And Kevin Doogie was our head crew chief. So before I walked on stage, I hand my guitar to him.
Wow.
And he's tuning it, making sure everything is good.
That's great.
So obviously he came with Michael Anthony, so I got to catch up with Doogie and talk with him for a little bit.
That's That's great.
Talk about a book. If Michael Anthony doesn't write a book, Doogie needs to write a book.
He totally can. We had him on the podcast, and I was actually texting with him a couple weeks ago. He's an interesting character in and of himself. He's like a very famous tech guy in the rock world.
He is.
You know?
And the fact that he has been with Michael Anthony since the beginning.
Oh, it's incredible. It's unbelievable.
They're best friends.
Unbelievable.
And he is stuck with him from the very beginning, and he's still with him to this day.
Amazing.
Which I think is fantastic.
And believe it or not, I don't know if you know this, but he goes out and works with other people when Michael is not busy. Like, he'll go out, and I think he said, I'm going out with Bret Michaels or something. Like, so he keeps himself busy, man. Let me tell you something. That is a lot of work. And, you know, Doogie's like an older guy now. He's not some kid. So, you know, he's like Michael's age, if not older, and he's running around. And, like, you know, I don't know how old he is. Maybe he's like 70 or something like that, and doing all this tech.
He's getting close.
Yeah.
And he actually is kind of retired from the road. And I was talking to him before we played with Michael Anthony.
Really?
And he said, I wasn't planning on doing any more tours. And I get a call from Sammy. He's like, come on, just do this one last tour with me. So I said, fine, I'll go out and do it. So this may be his last tour, but he is sticking with him.
Wow, that's awesome, man. That's so cool. Now, you also had an experience with Sam in 2016, right?
That was the first camp that I attended. It was in February of 2015 in Las Vegas.
Okay.
What was interesting was I had looked at these rock camps for a couple of years, and, you know, as an amateur musician, you kind of feel a little intimidated. But when I saw that Sammy Hagar was going to be the headliner, I thought, I'm going to do this. So all by myself on my own, I signed up and I went to this camp. My first experience, I had Rudy Sarzo from Ozzy and Quiet Riot as my counselor. He was amazing to work with.
So cool.
And we got to play I Can't Drive 55 with Sammy. And just like Michael Anthony, Sammy was not as tall as I thought. He was about as tall as me. But he was also very nice, very gracious. He was joking around with us. He was doing shots of the rum with some of the band members because they had it on site. So he really got into it and signed my 5150 album. He signed a poster that I had. He signed a picture of me and Sammy that the first time I met him in 2003.
Wow.
And he just signed everything, and he was as good as Michael Anthony, and that's what kept me coming back to the camps. When I went to this first camp, I told my wife, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I have to do this.
Right.
And then the next year, literally a year later, they announced the Zakk Wylde, Steve Vai, Tony Iommi camp. And I thought, oh, God, I've got to go to this. I'm like, okay, it's a two-time-in-a-lifetime experience. I've got to go to this camp. So the next year I went to that camp. And then you usually decide which camp you're going to, obviously based on the headliners.
Right.
So it's got to be someone that I'm really excited about and into. And then last year, they announced a camp with John Five right after he joined Motley Crue.
Wow.
And Richard Fortus, who's in Guns N' Roses, but he also is a St. Louisan. So I grew up listening to Richard Fortus.
Wow.
So I thought, you know what? This will be a really cool opportunity to play with someone from Guns N' Roses. And we have the St. Louis connection. I've actually met him a few times before. Right. So I went back to that camp. And then we ended by playing with Ricky Rocket from Poison.
Oh, it's great.
At the Whiskey.
That's
and then
incredible.
The other thing they did at this camp to kind of keep the Van Halen theme going is they had Steve Rosen, the author of Tone Chaser, come to camp, and he did a Q&A. So I brought my copy of Tone Chaser with me to get him to sign it.
Nice.
And obviously, he's now on the 3rd edition, and I have the 2nd edition.
Yeah.
But I was able to have a really good conversation with him about the book, you know, how I thought that it was smart that he didn't go with the publishers who wanted him to cut it down to 300 pages.
Yeah.
And he kept it at 600. He stayed true to the story and gave us an insight that we've never had before. Obviously, he talked about the relationship with Eddie and what happened near the end and how it broke down. Interestingly enough, the question came up, what do you think happened? happened, and he thinks it was the change in management.
Yeah.
Is the reason why everything
a lot of people
changed
said
for
that
him.
too. I know Niels Lozauer felt the same way. He was very close with the band and shot them for years. And, when the change in management came about, they sort of like sweep the streets. People get caught in the wake there. So that's very true. And I'm glad you got to see Steve. So now when you did the gig at the Whiskey, that's like a full show with Sebastian?
It is. So each band got an opportunity to play a song with Sebastian. And it's interesting. Sebastian is a big Van Halen fan. He's a big Kiss fan.
Oh, yeah.
So some of the bands were playing Van Halen songs, Kiss songs. We actually played Youth Gone Wild, which was exciting for me because, I was a Skid Row fan back in the day, and the opportunity to play that with him. And he was great. I get on stage, and there's a crowd of people there, and he's on the mic, asking everybody where they're from. And I tell him I'm from St. Louis, and he's like, "What's that bar on the other side of that river?" Well, that's where all the strip clubs are. I'm like, I think you're talking about Pops in Sauget. We'll talk about that later. But he was very gracious with everyone, and he delivered. He did not hold back. He did monkey business with somebody, and he let it fly. You are absolutely right on the fact that he has preserved his voice. Let's just hope maybe one day we see him back with Skid Row out on tour and we can see the original band.
Well, let me tell you.
Yeah, but keep hoping. But
I know.
That's a big leap. Hey, I wanted to ask you, Brad, after working with Sammy and Mike and Vic, and I think you said you worked with Steve Vai, too, for that matter, at the camp. Out of all those guys in the Van Halen circle, what are some of the most memorable pieces of musical advice you got from them?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think the best thing that I got, which is kind of funny, is Vic just started playing the acoustic Lower Key Dreams with Sammy. This was before a lot of the YouTube videos were coming out because I wanted to learn how to play it in that version. So I was lucky enough to get a personal lesson from Vic Johnson on how to play Dreams in the acoustic version, exactly how he plays it. So he worked with me and showed me the chords, and we ended up playing it together. And that was exciting for me to be able to nail that with Vic. I probably spent more time with Vic because he was my counselor than obviously Sammy or Mike or Steve Vai, because when they bring in these artists, the big name artists, they've got about 10, actually this last camp, there were 15 bands they had to play with. So it's kind of a well-oiled machine where you're waiting as the band before you is playing, so you get to watch them. Then they do their pictures and autographs. They come off, you go up. You play your song. The band after you is in the room watching you perform with them. So you don't get to spend as much time as I would like. I understand because they've got to get through everybody, and these artists are probably playing the same song 10 times in some cases.
Yeah.
But even those little moments, I have to look back and think to myself, I got the opportunity to play with the Van Halen members that would do this. Obviously, Alex, I don't think would do a rock and roll fantasy camp if he ever did.
No.
Obviously, that would sell out immediately.
Yeah.
And, Eddie never needed to do it, nor would he have done it, I think, if he was still around. Wolfgang, who knows where he'll end up, but he's really busy with everything he's doing. So this was my opportunity to personally connect with a member of Van Halen and just have an experience like that. And I don't go to meet and greets. The only thing that I ever did was in 2012, I did do the VIP package for Van Halen as my 40th birthday gift to myself. And as you know, we got to sit through the sound check. I had goosebumps the whole time. When it was over, I called my wife to tell her, "You're not going to believe what I just did." And as I'm telling her this, I'm choking up.
Wow.
And tears are coming down my face because I cannot believe I got to see Van Halen with 30 other people.
Wow.
So I don't do the meet and greets because I want to have more time what I get at the Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp.
And how many people are in the camp?
It depends. So they have 10 bands, I would say, is about average, and you have 5 or 6 in the band. So you're 50 to 60 people. This camp, because it was Michael Anthony, they actually had 15 bands.
Wow.
So it's a lot of time to get through every single band to give them a chance to play a song, but it's definitely worth the experience. The other thing I'll mention is if anyone's interested in Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp, the owner of the camp, David Fishoff, a couple of years ago, produced a documentary. It's called Rock Camp the Movie, and you can go on Prime Video, and it's on there. The movie kind of takes you how he came up with the idea for the camp, and then they actually follow a few people. They start these people's home lives, and they kind of show them go through the camp and the experience. And one of the people they feature in the movie is a female singer named Tammy Fisher from New York. She actually lives in New Jersey. When I went to the camp last year, she was the singer in my band. And it's funny, on the plane to Los Angeles, I was like, I'm just going to watch the Rock Camp movie again.
Wow.
And I didn't realize she was in the movie till I was on the plane.
That's
so
incredible.
Then I walk in the room and Tammy's standing right there. I feel like I'm playing with a movie star.
That's awesome.
So if you're interested and want to see more about it, the Rock Camp the movie is a great movie. You've got Alice Cooper, Roger Daltrey, Slash, Michael Anthony's even in it because he's done camps before. And they talk to the artists and they say how much they enjoy doing these camps and interacting with the fans because they don't normally get that opportunity because they're so busy, and they shield them from the fans, and they really enjoy the interaction and the celebration of their craft and their music.
That's awesome. Thank you.
That's interesting that the guy organizing that is David Fisher. He's been in the business a long time. He was the guy who first got the Monkees back together in 1986 when that tour just exploded and everybody in the band just totally underestimated how big that thing was going to go. But somehow he knew.
So David Fishoff started as a sports agent. He was Phil Simms and Mark Bavaro's agent, and he tells stories about Mark Bavaro crashing on his couch. And I was a Giants fan back in the day when they were winning all those Super Bowls. And he went from sports into entertainment, obviously did the Monkees. He also did the American Gladiators tour when they took them on the road, and then started doing the Ringo Starr All-Star tour. And he's the one that put that together and got all the other musicians to play with him. And you'll see in the movie, he tells it was on the Ringo Starr All-Star tour where he got the idea of doing Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp. They played a joke on him, and he thought, you know what? Wouldn't it be great if people could experience this part of the entertainment industry?
Right.
These are things you don't get to see on stage, but there's so much to it. The Ringo Starr All-Star Tour is still going on.
Yeah.
And he's been involved in a lot of other projects, but he's one of these that when he has an idea, he runs with it and it works. He actually, I think it was a year ago, did the very first comedy fantasy camp where aspiring comedians, or if you think you're funny, you would go to Los Angeles. He'd work with Jay Leno and Adam Carolla. They just brought in John Lovitz.
Wow.
Working on your material, and you get a chance to go to the Comedy Store on Sunset and present your material and hopefully get a good reaction.
So, you think you're funny, huh? That's John Lovitz. Yeah, that's awesome, man. Listen, just out of curiosity, is this Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp, is it mainly like middle-aged white guys our age?
You know, it's funny. You would think that, but he has people come to these camps that are as young, believe it or not. At the camp I went to last year, they had a kids band where there was a drummer. I want to say he was 8 or 9 years old.
Oh my God.
Ricky Rocket is his favorite. And this little kid killed it. He had everyone's jaws were on the ground, and he's up there playing with Ricky Rocket, his hero. So you would think it's all guys like us, middle-aged guys that just can't let go of the dream, but they do kid bands. And what I like about it is where the music industry is today, unfortunately, we're not getting as much rock and roll.
Yeah.
But there is a generation of these young kids that love this music.
That's
and
true.
They're playing all of those hits. They're into Van Halen. They're into Motley Crue. They're into Poison.
Yeah.
And they love playing it. So, and at this last camp, we did have another kids band. So you've got kids that are in their early teens, and then you have guys who were in their probably 70s. So it's for everybody. If you're a fan of rock and roll, or they announce a camp and there's an artist that's going to be there that has been someone you've been a fan of, you need to go. You'll get to meet them, maybe play with them, interact with them. It's a fantastic experience.
Well, listen, thank you so much for your time, Brad, and for letting us know about this experience you've had. It's so fun talking to you and listening to you, and thank you for being supportive of the cast and listening all these years and working out while you're listening. It's so nice that you do that, and we appreciate the support. I really do.
Well, thank you very much. It's been an honor to speak with you guys.
Edward learned classical piano, and Alex, as far as I know, was always involved in the drums. Their father is a professional musician, and Mr. Van Halen plays clarinet on one of the songs on the new record coming up, which, incidentally, the name of the new album is Diver Down, and Mr. Van Halen plays clarinet on a song called Big Bad Bill is Sweet William Now, so you'll get a real taste of the roots. I, on the other hand, have no musical influences whatsoever, and that explains my position.
The long-awaited Van Halen book from legendary rock journalist Steve Rosen is here. Tone Chaser, Understanding Edward, my 26-year journey with Edward Van Halen. This is an over 400-page odyssey of Rosen's decades interviewing and being friends with the late guitar god, Eddie Van Halen. Rosen says, I spent 14 long, hard months writing Tone Chaser. It was both the most difficult story I've ever written and the most rewarding. I wanted to be honest and transparent as I possibly could, which was not always an easy thing to do. In the end, this was the most complete and comprehensive book I could have possibly written. There was nothing left to say when I reached the last page. With every word I wrote, I was reminded of the time I spent with Edward, and that hurt terribly. But it also brought back what a remarkable experience that was, and how insanely lucky I had been to have ever known him, and astonishingly to have been friends with him. I hope you can feel everything I felt. That is the purpose of this book. Pre-sales are currently going on now for the self-published book. PayPal Steve directly at scrosen@sbcglobal.net. That's scrosen@sbcglobal.net. It's $47 for those who are buying it inside the U.S., and that includes shipping. $95 for those who are buying it overseas, and that includes shipping. Tone Chaser, Understanding Edward, my 26-year journey with Edward Van Halen. Don't miss out. Order it today.
Martin Popoff here, telling all the listeners of the epic Dave and Dave Unchained podcast where you can get my 3 Van Halen books. It's all at martinpopoff.com. We've got Van Halen at 50. We've got Van Halen, a visual biography, and we've got Unchained, a Van Halen user manual, all available from martinpopoff.com. There are PayPal Buy Now buttons for Canada, US, and international. I sign them, send them all out from my office here. There you go. Thanks again for listening to Dave and Dave Unchained.
Hi, this is Desmond Child, and you're listening to Dave and Dave Unchained.
Hello, loyal listeners. Wanted to let you know about our new Patreon. If you like what we do and you have the means, drop us a donation to keep the podcast going. Go to patreon.com/DD Unchained. That's patreon.com/DDUNCHAINED. Any size contributions are greatly appreciated. We have special packages to those who donate $45 or more. You'll get the Unchained package. Trust me, it's worth it. Contribute $65 or more and you can get the Romeo Delight package, which is Unchained plus more. $95 or more scores you the Top Jimmy package, which is the kitchen sink. If you're a Van Halen hardcore and listen to this cast, this is stuff you'll appreciate. It's ear candy. Those who want one of the packages simply email ddunchainedpodcast@gmail.com. That's ddunchainedpodcast@gmail.com to make arrangements. What is understood need not be discussed.
I'm the guy next to you on the turnpike, on the freeway, you know, the one who's playing the air guitar, you know, and doing the air drums, you know, and carrying on with us, sing the chorus, and I'm the 3 chicks in the background going, shoop, shoop, and the trombone player, and on and on and on. Look at me already. Even as I talk about it, I start to get flare up, you know?
All right, guys, so we have a special edition here. Dave and I have been talking about doing this for a while, and I finally worked it up, and we discussed it together, and we're going to go over this with you. This is called Dave and Sam by the Numbers. Now, what the hell does that mean? Well, we're basically sizing up each guy with a lot of the Van Halen stats. And it actually comes out to some really interesting things that you might not even know about, just to see how they compare side by side. You know, they're always talking about which one is more successful, which one has more accolades, all these different things. But it really is interesting when you look at the cold, hard facts as to who achieved what and how. So Dave and I are going to get into this. Dave, I know you love a Dave versus Sam type of thing. So how did you feel about this whole process?
Oh, I've been waiting for this for a long time. No doubt. But the numbers were very interesting. Some of the stuff I suspected and other things I was like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that.
Right?
So, yeah, hard to disagree with the facts, but we'll obviously dive into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to start off, now we all know there's an age difference, right? So Dave is 69 years old, very, very soon to be 70, which is next month. We'll celebrate that then. And Sam, next month, is going to be 77. So he is currently 76. So as of this recording, Dave's 69 and Sam is 76. There's a 7-year difference between them. Interesting enough, they both have the same sign, astrological sign. So that's kind of funny, even though there's 7 years between them. Now, I would say Sam's in probably better shape, right, Dave? I mean, it's not that Dave's in physically bad shape. He has ailments that are sort of a little mysterious and unknown. But Sam is out there and active, and we both saw him on stage, and he looked pretty damn good for a guy who's turning 77.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I don't know who his doctor or plastic surgeon is, but they're both doing a great job. Sam's generally older than the rest of the band.
Oh, yeah.
Because everybody else is more or less around Dave's age, give or take a few years here and there, because Sam started his career before the rest of the band did.
Yeah.
But it was interesting, despite that slight age gap, he fit right in, and to this day, that guy's got a ton of energy.
Yeah, he has a lot of spunk, and like Dave said, he never came off as the old man in the group. Never did. So, and of course, we all know Dave was the same age as the other guys. You know, Alex is a little bit older, and, you know, Mike, Ed, and Dave are around the same age. So it's really interesting to note that, but I think Sam really wins that battle because, number one, he's older and he's got a lot of energy and a lot of spunk. He really didn't have any plastic surgery, though. I don't think he had any plastic surgery. He seems to be aging nicely. Must be all that tequila that's preserving him, Dave.
I guess so.
Yeah.
I guess so.
Absolutely. Also wanted to go through the number of Van Halen songs, right? You never really think about this. Funny enough, Dave has 69 recorded songs with Van Halen, and we're talking about the ones on the albums, basically. And Sam, 43. Now, of course, Sam has less albums than Dave, right? So we're going to get into that. But, you know, you got to keep that in mind. And he had less years in the band, although professionally, he had more well, no, that's not true. Not if you count the second half with Dave. So, yeah, so it's interesting how that works out. But it's funny, the number of songs, you know what I mean? Even though Dave's run was very compacted, not counting A Different Kind of Truth. Dave's run, the 69, does include A Different Kind of Truth. But I'm just saying, he, you know, obviously compacted a lot of songs and work from 78 to 84. You know, back then, everybody put out an album a year almost. And, you know, Sam had 4 albums with Van Halen, but he kind of took his time, you know, through the years to do those. So, what'd you think of that comparison?
It was amazing how prolific Van Halen was.
Right.
During Dave's first run of the band. They were basically doing an album a year or like every 18 months.
Right. And remember, they were pushed to do so.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to get to that later when we get on another topic.
Right.
But yeah, they were definitely pushed by the record company, and they would record an album, tour. break for a couple of weeks, record an album, tour, rest for a couple of weeks. And that was the cycle.
Oh, yeah.
All the time. Mm-hmm. And then after Dave left and they got Sam, then the breaks started getting a little longer. It was like every 2 years, then every 3 years.
Right.
And then by that time, I think the band was kind of like, we don't need to crank out an album a year anymore. Because, that wears on you. They had families by that time.
Yeah.
I guess they only last about a decade with each lead singer, so that's why. So by the time it was Sam's turn to leave, they only had about 4 studio albums, I believe, to their credit. So that's why Sam has less songs.
Absolutely. Now, we sized up the number of covers between them. And now Dave wins this one for sure. That's a win for Dave. He has more songs. And in terms of the covers, Dave has more covers. So Dave has, of course, You Really Got Me, Ice Cream Man, You're No Good, Dancing in the Street, Pretty Woman, Big Bad Bill of Sweet William Now, Happy Trails, and Where Have All the Good Times Gone? Sam, on the other hand, only has 2 recorded covers with Van Halen, Apolitical Blues and Won't Get Fooled Again. So that's a win for Dave there, if you consider it a win to have more covers. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a win, but it's interesting that when they were with Dave, they were more likely to record covers. And I think that was a Dave influence.
Right.
Because I think by the time Sam joined the band, Ed was putting his foot down.
Oh, yeah.
And he was always a fan of doing original music than covers anyway. And it's interesting because the 2 covers that Sam did, the one, Apolitical Blues, was a bonus track on OU 812.
Right.
This is how old we are, Dave. That was only available on the CD when the album came out. And Won't Get Fooled Again was on the live album. So studio-wise, the band was not big on covers. They much rather do their own work. But I'll tell you, and this is no surprise to anybody who's listened to the podcast, because Dave and I always say this, when Van Halen did a cover, they made it their own.
Oh, totally.
I mean, You Really Got Me is just as well known, maybe even a little more well-known, depending on who you talk to.
Oh, yeah, big
than
time.
the original one by the Kinks. Dancing in the Streets, Dave, you like to say that's almost a Van Halen original.
Oh,
right?
totally.
So it just goes to show that Van Halen just didn't copy a song just for the sake of copying it. They really tried to make the covers their own. That was part of the secret sauce that made the band great. That was lost when Sam joined the band.
Absolutely. Now, the number of albums is Dave has 7 studio albums, 1 live album. Sam has 4 studio albums, 1 live album. We're going to get to the compilations later, but they're both on the compilation, so they kind of cancel each other out. So Dave obviously wins that one with 8 over Sam's 5. That's an interesting back and forth there. Dave obviously scoring some extra points by coming in later on and having another run with the band from 2007 to 2015 by getting another album out and finally a live album out. So what'd you make of that?
Right. Yeah. Again, sign of the times of how hard Van Halen were working when they first started out with Dave, as we discussed before.
Right. Now, in numbers of tours, we're talking about official tours here because we can't count all those shows Dave did prior to the official launch of Van Halen 1. It's just too many. It's hard to tally those up. That's literally impossible. Maybe Greg Renoff will get to that one day to tally that up, but it's almost impossible because we don't have the documentation from back then from all the clubs and all the backyard parties. But in terms of tours, Dave has 9 full tours with Van Halen and Sam 6. And why does Sam have 6? Because we have tour for each studio album, tour for the live album, and the reunion tour. And we'll get to all that later. What did you think of that, Dave?
Yeah, again, because Van Halen almost religiously would tour after every album. Actually, not almost. I think they did tour after every album, including Sam's live album. They toured for that. I guess you could argue for Dave's live album, too. So Dave does have more because he was around for the reunion years when they were, I don't know if you want to call them a nostalgic act, but they were touring just to tour and they weren't touring behind an album. Dave has a couple of those under his belt with the band, so that's why he has more than Sam on this one. Sam did that once. They did tour behind the greatest hits. But Sam only had one shot to do that, and Dave had 2 or 3, depending how you want to count it.
Exactly. Now, in terms of live shows, again, we're talking about Van Halen 1 on, okay? In terms of Dave, he did the 1978 World Tour, 180 shows for US, Canada, Asia, and Europe. In 1979, he did the World Vacation Tour, 108 shows, US, Canada, Japan, and Europe. 1980, did the World Invasion Tour, 124 shows, US, Canada, Puerto Rico, and Europe. Then we move on to the 1981 Fair Warning Tour, where they did 81 shows, just US and Canada. You could see it's paring down a little bit. The 1982-83 Hide Your Sheep Tour, that's for Diver Down, 97 shows, US, Canada, and South America. The 1984 tour, 101 shows, US, Canada, and part of Europe. That was a short European tour on the Monsters of Rock thing at the end. Then, of course, during the reunion tours, Dave comes back for 2007-2008 reunion tour, 76 shows in US and Canada. The Different Kind of Truth tour from 2012 to 2013, 60 shows, US, Canada, Australia, and Japan. And, of course, the final tour, which is 2015 Summer Tour, 41 shows, US and Canada. Gives Dave a grand total of 868 shows with Van Halen. Now, we all know Dave's done way more than that because he played for years prior to Van Halen 1. So you're looking at a good end of 72, then you got 73, 74, 75, 76, 77. I mean, you know, you're looking at a good 6+ years prior. So it's even way more than that, but we can only count professionally. Sam, on the other hand, 1986, 5150 tour was 111 shows, US and Canada. 1988 to 89, the OU812 tour, 76 shows, US and Japan. 1991-1992 Fuck Tour, 99 shows, US, Canada, and Mexico. 1993 Right Here, Right Now tour, 60 shows, US and Europe. And, believe it or not, the biggest tour with Sam was 1995's Balance Tour, 135 shows, US, Europe, and Asia, which is really kind of interesting. And for the 2004 reunion tour with Sam, they did 83 shows, which was the US and Canada. So that totaled 524. So 524 shows with Sam, and Dave winning that one with 868 shows. So that's interesting. It's funny, you could see how early in their career, they're doing over 100 shows. They're banging out tours. I mean, some of these tours are crazy. You know, 124 shows, 108 shows. First tour, 1978, 180 shows. That's a lot of shows in 1 year, man. And then, you know, Fair Warning goes down to 81. Even, you know, 1984, as big as that album was, it was 101. You know what I mean? So it's interesting how it all pans out. The last tour was only 41 shows, short run. But Balance, really huge. They went hard on Balance. 135 shows. That is wild for them to do that, especially later on in their career. Now, it also comes into play when you hear about Sam, when he was talking about, especially in his book, he came off the road from Balance. They had this album, and they had a rough time making Balance. You know, they were doing it, Bruce Fairbairn, and Sam had an issue with vocals, and he had to record them separately from 5150. As Sam tells you, it was a hard time making that album. Then they had a really long tour, and Sam's wife was pregnant. So when Ed came to him looking to do the Twister soundtrack, Sam was like, you gotta be kidding me, dude. We need a break. You can understand his frustration a little bit there because that was a very long tour and that was a hard album to come out with. And they still did really well with that album and tour. They really did well with that. So what do you make of these details, Dave?
So I looked at the number of shows they did compared to the number of tours they had. And with the math we just did, I was frantically scrambling, redoing my numbers while you were talking.
Yeah, because I forgot to add the...
I see that now, right. But even with that, it's interesting to note that Sam had 6 tours compared to Dave's 9. So Sam had 67% of the number of tours. But in terms of number of shows they played, Sam only had about 60% of the shows that they played. So stating it another way, if you look at the average number of shows per tour, Van Halen with Dave had more at 96 compared to Van Halen with Sam that had 87. Now, that's not that big of a variance. And as you pointed out, some of these tours were really short and some of them were really long.
Yeah.
The 78 tour, I mean, that was 180 shows.
That's
I mean,
insane.
holy cow. I mean, that really pushes the Dave numbers over the edge.
That basically is saying they're playing every other night in a year.
Yeah,
That's basically what
they were opening acts. It was crazy.
Yeah.
So the point here is, looking strictly at the numbers, it looked like they did a little more touring with Dave. But again, I think that first tour just pushes them over the edge. But it's fair to say, as we pointed out before, when they released an album, they toured behind it. Some shows were longer than others.
Right.
Rather, I should say some tours were longer than others. But, I mean, they still put in the work. The other thing to note is that Van Halen did more international touring, as you pointed out, with Dave. There was more going to Europe. There was more going to Japan. They did the South American run, which you know I love very much.
Yeah.
But really not so much with Sam. I mean, they did go to Japan once. And, I mean, I guess if you count Canada as non-U.S., then they went there too. And they did go to Europe in 93. And actually, they even went to Europe and Asia in 95. But I don't think they hit as many places. It just felt like by the time they did start going to Europe again, they had lost a lot of ground.
Right, that's the truth. Now, this is getting into an interesting area here. We're talking about album peak positions. So follow me along here. We're going to start with Dave. Van Halen 1 got as high as number 19 on the Billboard charts. We're talking about the main Billboard album charts. Got to number 19. Van Halen 2 did better in terms of charting, because remember, the band's already well known now. Got to number 6. Pretty high, which is good, right? Women and Children First, match that, got to number 6. Fair Warning, beat that, got to number 5. Diver Down, beat that, got to number 3. And 1984, beat that, got to number 2. And A Different Kind of Truth met that and got to number 2. Now, here's the funny story about Different Kind of Truth and 1984. Both were cock-blocked. How were they cock-blocked? Number 1, okay, 1984, I mean, this is an unfair thing. They battled Michael Jackson's Thriller, one of the biggest albums of all time, if not the biggest album of all time. I don't count the Eagles' Greatest Hits as an album. That's a Greatest Hits compilation. Single album, biggest album of all time, Michael Jackson's Thriller. Now, also, Ed's on that album and helped propel it to get even higher. So there's a little bit of that going on there. That's hard to beat. A Different Kind of Truth. You ready for this, Dave? Got cock-blocked from reaching number 1 by Adele. Her album, which was, I don't know, was called 25 or something. I forgot the name of that album. I think it's 25 or something like that. The one that had the Hello song on it was really big at the time.
Right.
Yeah, it was crazy. So both times those albums got cock-blocked. Now, let's be honest here. Sam wins this one hands down because we all know 5150 went to number 1. OU812 went to number 1. For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge went to number 1. Balance went to number 1. And Sam pulls this out. You know he loves showing this off. All my albums went number 1. I don't know what you guys got to say about anything. And just for funsies, I added this. Best of Volume 1 went to number 1. And Best of Both Worlds went to number 3. So what do you make of this, Dave?
Well, I certainly can't blame Sam for promoting this as much as he can. I mean, It's the truth. All his studio albums went to number 1. Certainly can't deny that. As time went on, Van Halen's peak chart position would get better and better. That wasn't always reflective of sales, which we'll get to in a little bit. But certainly in terms of chart position, they only got better and better, well, till Gary came into the band. Then they slipped. Impressively, I think that album went to like number 4 or something like that.
Right.
If I'm remembering correctly.
Right.
The other interesting tidbit about A Different Kind of Truth that I'll add was they did get blocked by Adele. And that was in part because Dave had insisted that the album come out a certain week. I forget the details of why he wanted it out that week. I think they were like promoting the album and he wanted it that week. But it just so happened that was the same week as Adele's album came out. And they hadn't counted on that. And if they had done it a week before or a week after, they would have got the number one album.
And this was also when, I don't know if you guys remember this, but there was some sort of like massive Target promotion with Adele. I mean, that album is crazy. She really was moving records, like albums, CDs, records. She was moving product, Adele. She really was. Yeah. Big time. So that was huge. So now we get to single peak positions. This is interesting. Really interesting. So there are some singles that didn't even possibly chart, but let me just tell you about the ones that did. From Van Halen 1, Running with the Devil only made it to 84 in the chart, the Billboard Top 100 chart. You Really Got Me to number 36. So way bigger. Van Halen 2, Dance the Night Away, went all the way up to number 15. And Beautiful Girls only hit 84. Now, And the Cradle Will Rock from Women and Children First went to 55. A lot of low-hanging fruit here. Fair Warning, So This Is Love, 110. I guess it's the Billboard Top 200, I apologize. And Diver Down, what did it produce? Pretty Woman, hot single at number 12. And Dancing in the Street did pretty well at 38. Now, we all know when 1984 came about, we had a lot of chart success. Jump, number one single, Van Halen's only number one single. I'll Wait, number 13. Surprisingly, Panama, same. Panama reached number 13. Hot for Teacher only made it to 56. Now, in terms of a different kind of truth, Tattoo made it to 67. What does that give the total for the Dave era of Van Halen? 1 number one, 4 top 20s, and 2 top 40s. So that's where you stand with Dave. Now, here's Sam. This is interesting. 5150. Why Can't This Be Love got to number 3. Dreams hit 22. And so did Love Walks In, 22. Interesting. OU812, Black and Blue hits number 34. Shocking to me. I didn't even know it made it that high. When It's Love, number 5. Nice high number. Finish What You Started, number 13. That's very high. For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, right now made it to number 55. Top of the World to number 27. Now let me just stop here for a second and tell you, we're not counting all these derivative mainstream rock charts and all that shit. There's so many different branches that Billboard does. We're talking about like the top 200 songs. You know what I mean?
The singles chart.
The singles charts, right. The kind of overall singles charts. Balance, Can't Stop Loving You, number 30. And Not Enough, number 97. Now, what does that give Sam? 2 top 10s, 1 top 20, and 5 top 40s. Now, this is an interesting comparison because Van Halen with Dave has 1 number 1 single, but Sam has 2 top 10s. Dave has 4 top 20s. Sam only has 1 top 20. But Dave only has 2 top 40s, and Sam has 5 top 40s. So it's an interesting matching there. I don't know, how would you say it? Yeah, I guess Dave probably, did he win that one? I mean, I don't know, because Sam's got a good successful 8 singles, and then Dave's got 7 singles. I think Sam really wins that one out, even though Jump is number 1, but Sam has, I think, higher chart success. I'm going to give that one to Sam. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, a little bit. In fact, I'm going to add one more. We left off Feel So Good.
Yeah, but what did that get to?
That went to number 35.
Did it really? Because I went to the Billboard chart and checked that. It was not on there. The Billboard website, this is what they do. The Billboard website, you can go the history of Van Halen singles. Mixing with Dave and Sam, it'll show you all the charted singles that they have done. I didn't see Feel So Good on there. Where did you see that?
No, it definitely, well, I did a quick internet search because I could have sworn it went top 40.
Okay.
So I'm sure someone will correct us if we're wrong.
Can you hear the sound of a pencil sharpener on that really dark castle atop the Midwest? You know where that's coming from.
Well, I'm sure Ron will correct us where he made mistakes. But anyway, aside from that minor addition, it's interesting to see that in the beginning, Van Halen didn't really have, certainly with the first album, you know, they barely scraped the top 40. And then they had a decent-sized hit with Dance the Night Away for Van Halen 2.
Yeah.
Then a couple more albums go by. They really don't have album success. Fair Warning had like virtually nothing.
Yeah.
And that's when the record company started getting a little nervous.
Yeah.
So they were ecstatic when Pretty Woman went all the way to number 12.
Right.
That was their biggest charting hit at the time.
Right.
And that's why the record company was like, you guys are definitely recording another album right now.
Right. And they put out another cover single, Dancing in the Street.
Right. The band thought they were going to have some time off, but it turns out, be careful what you ask for, you may get it.
Yeah.
They had a hit, so they had to record the album behind it. And then, obviously, with Jump, I mean, that's a song of the decade, not just for Van Halen, but it's just one of those 80s songs. And then they rode the wave after that. And then Sam, usually they'd have like one decent hit from the album and then some other smaller hits after that. You can see 5150, the big hit was Why Can't This Be Love?
Sure.
And then OU 812, it was When It's Love. Interesting was for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. They didn't have any big top 40 hits there. Top of the World only went to number 27. And even Balance, Can't Stop Loving You, was number 30. But despite not having huge singles, their albums went to number 1. And that was around the time, certainly, let me see, For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge came out in 91. So that's when they started automating, figuring out which albums sold and thus which albums charted the highest. Because before it was just a survey to record stores, and that could be manipulated a lot.
Oh, sure.
And then when they started using, I think it was called SoundScan, they were able to automate that. And what happened was, typically the big artists, when they had a new album come out, it would go to number 1 or chart really high in the top 5 the first week. And then after that, it would just drop, unless you had a lot of singles from the album.
Right.
That was pretty much the norm for a while. That's what happened to Van Halen, too. But interesting to see their single chart history and, you know, what songs are classic today that weren't even singles, or songs that were singles but really aren't that huge now. I mean, Can't Stop Loving You was a top 40 hit, but you're really not hearing much of that anymore. So interesting stuff there.
Very interesting. Now, in terms of the album sales, I'm going to give you what we have. But let's be honest, they have not been properly tallied in eons. So we just have what we have, which I got from the chart makers. It says here, Van Halen 1 is 11.6 million, and globally they say it's over 15 million. Van Halen 2, 5.4 million. Globally they're saying it's 7.2 million. Women and Children First, 3.8 million. Globally they're saying it's 5.3. Fair Warning, 2.8 million. Globally, 4 and change million. Diver Down, 4.3 million. Globally, 5.7 million. 1984, 10.9 million. Globally, 15.4 million. And A Different Kind of Truth, 430,000. Globally, they said it's 740,000. Now, in terms of Sam, 5150, 6.3 million. Globally, they're saying it's 8.7. OU812, 4.3. Globally, they're saying it's 5.7. The Fuck album, 3.7. Globally, they're saying it's 4.9. Balance, 3.0 and change. And globally, they're saying it's 4.8. So, all good numbers. I mean, they really are amazing numbers. Now, let's be honest, Dave wins here. Well, he has more albums for sure. That's not without question. But he also has 2 diamonds. So, what are diamonds? 10 million or bigger. Van Halen 1, 1984. Those are just huge. So, those shut out alone what Sam has sold. So those 2 alone, and then everything else, you know, like Van Halen 2 sold strong, and Women and Children, they're all like strong selling albums. Diver Down sold strong. Even Fair Warning, which was considered lower with 2.8, that's considered low. Today, it's a smash. Different Kind of Truth, you know, if you look at the globally, and if you probably did the numbers, it probably went gold. You ready for this, folks? While doing this, according to these numbers, if you actually did the proper paperwork, Van Halen 3 is platinum. And I know you're laughing at that, oh, Van Halen 3 sucked, blah, 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 blah. It was a bomb. But if you look at the sales, it actually sold over 1 million. So that's interesting to note. What do you think of these sales, Dave?
I think with the exception of A Different Kind of Truth, it's fascinating to point out that all the Van Halen studio albums not including the one with Gary.
Right.
But all the ones with Dave and Sam, except for A Different Kind of Truth, went platinum. I mean, that's astounding. That is simply...
That's an incredible record.
It is. It's an amazing run. I mean, how many bands can say that with two different lead singers? I mean, forget the Dave versus Sam thing for a second. That is a remarkable achievement.
Yeah.
And should be noted. Interesting to note that the first 4 Van Halen albums with Dave, they decreased. Like the first one sold more than the second one.
Yeah.
And then the second one sold more than the third. And I think that was also the general trend back in the day, which is why the record company was getting nervous. Fair warning. I mean, it went platinum, nothing to sneeze at, but it was their worst selling album to date. Like I said before, the record company was really getting nervous. So when Pretty Woman took off as a single, that really helped dive her down, and it charted better. And it gave Dave some leeway to say, hey, look, this is what we have to do to be successful, which obviously did not sit well with Ed, and he passively aggressively built his own studio so they would not do an album like Dive Her Down again. Proof was in the pudding there, because 1984 is their second best album of all time.
Yep. And we've talked about this before, but I'll just bring it up here. The stage was really being set for 1984 because Pretty Woman being the hit single, all the press and attention they got with the US Festival, they had a big spread in Life magazine. On top of that, and I really do believe this, Eddie being in Beat It was huge. And I really believe all these things coming together, Ed running around in the press with Valerie all the time, all of these little components kept building and building and building to a bigger stage for 1984. Now, 1984 came out and was a strong album, came out with a strong single right out the gate, comes out the top of the year with a #1 single, huge 3 videos. I mean, it was a rocket. It was an absolute rocket. And they just took over. And basically, in an indirect way, launched an entire genre of music of which they are not a part of. It's hysterical. It's so funny because the whole hairband movement, I would not under any circumstances consider Van Halen a hairband, but I will definitely tell you that the hairband movement was created by Van Halen because it was the fallout. Everybody trying to imitate them. So there was that. Van Halen's a 70s rock band, for sure. And they're considered an 80s band because they had a lot of success in the 80s, but they come from the 70s. They were born in the 70s. They rose to fame in the 70s. They grew up on 70s music. So they're not really an 80s band per se, even though they are categorized as that, but they're not a hair band. But they really kicked off the hairband movement because everybody wanted to imitate them. They started playing the Whiskey and the Starwood and all the places that they played, and they dressed like them, and the guitarist played like Eddie, and it was the whole fallout from it. But they were the original article. So that's what did you think of that thought, Dave?
Interesting perspective, how they started a whole trend. I think a lot of bands just focused on a few key components of the band, and that's one of the things that led to the hair metal movement. But there obviously was a lot more to Van Halen, like, for instance, like Ed's rhythm guitar playing, their songwriting ability, the background vocals, their 70s sensibility, as you pointed out, whereas newer bands came along, they just really distilled that to something else. So it is interesting that they did start a whole musical genre that they're not really part of. The other thing I'll point out, and you did say this before, but I do want to point it out again, and I want to point it out to Sammy Hagar. And Sammy, I want you to listen to me very carefully, because I know you're not good at math. But we're going to say this again, Sam. The sales of your entire studio catalog don't even add up, literally, to 2 albums with Dave. Those 2 albums being Van Halen 1 and 1984.
Absolutely.
So whenever Sam says he sold as much as the Dave era did, he is full of caca. Horribly incorrect. Very wrong. If he wants to talk about #1 albums, absolutely. I'll give him that. He absolutely had more #1 albums than the Dave era did. No disagreement there.
And I'll tell you where his argument is also strong. They made more money with Sam because of the age of which they played. Now, the ticket prices were higher, there was more merch, like everything was different. From 86 to 96, totally different world than from 78 to 84. I mean, not even close.
Oh, I agree with you. In fact, I'm currently reading a book on the history of concert touring.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how quickly certain things changed. I mean, I'll give you an example. I just read this tonight. The Pink Floyd Wall Tour, which was like around 1980, 1981. Like, that was a pivotal tour.
Yep.
Because they had all sorts of stuff on that tour, like special effects and flying pigs. And, maybe the flying pig was on the last tour, actually. But they had other flying things. Like, they really wanted to make it a spectacle, a show. Like, so much so that the tour was like a year and a half. But they only did about 30 shows in that year and a half.
Yeah.
Because to take it down and put it up was nutso, was insane. But that's like an example of like how things went from 0 to 60. You talk about the merch, you know, there was merch before, but like in the 80s, merch became a thing, another way to drive money. I mean, there were certainly t-shirts before that, but then there was all sorts of other things. But anyway.
We're going on to the number of awards. Now, Van Halen's never been a big awards band, but with Dave, Jump won the award for Best Stage Performance at the first MTV Music Awards in 1984, the VMAs. That was the biggest thing they won. With Sam, they won 2 awards in 1992. Best Hard Rock Performance at the 34th Annual Grammys and Favorite Heavy Metal / Hard Rock Album at the American Music Awards. And they also won 3 awards at the 1992 MTV VMAs, including Video of the Year for Right Now. So Sam wins that one for sure. Now, this is also where he talks about success. We won more awards, we had 4 number 1 singles, we made more money, we had bigger charting singles. So this is where he keeps saying, I was more successful. Yeah, so he had more singles in the top 40. Yeah, he had 4 number 1 albums. Yeah, he won more awards. Like, there's all these earmarkers of which he's totaling. But like when you said, in terms of album sales, you can't compare. Like, you know, Dave did more shows. Dave sold more albums. You know, there's a lot of things to consider. What do you say?
I say, yeah, there certainly are a lot of factors there. Van Halen, I mean, they were not regularly going to the Grammys or anything like that. They just were not one of those bands that were regularly nominated. They were not a critic's darling, which David Lee Roth has pointed out.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to call them a people's band, but, you know, they sort of kind of like Kiss. Beloved by their fans, but not so much by the critics. I think Kiss is a more extreme example of that because the critics almost disliked or hated Kiss, which just made their fans love them more. Van Halen wasn't that extreme. Their albums certainly weren't ripped apart, generally speaking, in the press, but nobody was ever lining them up album-wise to give them awards. Ed, obviously, if you're following him, he would get like Guitarist of the Award, I think for like 5 years in a row or something like that. So on a player level, Ed was obviously winning, but their albums or their singles, they just weren't leaving. I mean, even in their solo careers, like this story, Dave got nominated for like a bunch of awards one year, and he left with none. So they don't have too much luck in that department. But that's okay. I mean, the amount of platinum album awards they have in their houses replaces any Grammys that they feel like they might be missing.
That's true. And it's interesting enough also, the band with Sam had 3 Rolling Stone covers. Actually, the whole band is on 2 covers. Eddie's only on 1 for balance. And 0 with Dave. Dave was on the cover for his Crazy from the Heat album from 1985, but never with the band. So Van Halen with Dave never made the cover of Rolling Stone, which is interesting. But Sammy made it from 1986 and then 88, and then In 95, they had Eddie on the cover. What do you make of that? That's interesting, huh?
Yeah, I was always surprised by that. You never know with Rolling Stone. Maybe they were just not fans of the band. Maybe they just couldn't resist when Sam came along, that there was a great story behind there. I mean, who knows? Or maybe Dave didn't think they should be on the cover of a magazine like that. And Sam was like, sign me up, right? So,
right.
So yeah, that's interesting. But Rolling Stone always seemed to be very particular about who was going to be on their cover. I mean, like U2 was showing up all the time. REM felt like wasn't a year unless they were on the cover. So Rolling Stone certainly had their favorites, but you really didn't see too much hard rock. Well, you would see some, but like heavy metal, I mean, forget about it. They want somebody really popular on the cover to sell magazines, so I totally get that. Yeah. But no Van Halen, not even during 1984.
That's right.
Interesting.
Now, in terms of solo albums, we're talking about post Van Halen and also during Van Halen. During that era, we can't count before that. So Dave had Crazy from the Heat, went platinum in 1985, 1 million, right? Also hit number 15 on the charts. Eat 'Em and Smile came out in 1986, went platinum, sold 1 million copies, over 1 million copies, and hit number 4 on the Billboard charts. Skyscraper, 1988, went platinum, sold 1 million plus, hit number 6 on the Billboard charts. A Little Ain't Enough, 1991, went gold, over 500,000, and hit number 18 on the Billboard charts. And Your Filthy Little Mouth, in 1994, hit number 78. And we don't even know how many that sold, and little do we know what DLR Band sold, or Diamond Dave from 2003 and DLR Band from 1998. That's Dave. Now with Sam, again, talking about post or during Van Halen. I Never Said Goodbye, which is the album he did during Van Halen, 1987, went gold, 500,000 plus, hit number 14 on the Billboard charts. Marching to Mars, the 1997 album, hit number 18 on the charts, but I don't even have any sort of sales on that, along with Red Voodoo from 99, 1013 2000, Not For Sale 2002, Living It Up in 2006, Cosmic Universal Fashion 2008, Sammy Hagar and Friends in 2013, Light Roast 2014, Space Between in 2019, Lockdown 2020 in 2021, and Crazy Times in 2022. None of them have sales on that because they're too low to even count. So it looks like Dave wins in that category for sure in terms of the post or during Van Halen. So that's kind of cool. What do you make of that, Dave?
Yeah, but he certainly doesn't win in terms of solo album output.
No.
Since leaving the band. I mean, for all of Van Halen's talk when Sammy left the band, he was lazy and didn't want to work.
Yeah, he worked
I mean, look
a lot.
at this. I mean, the guy was regularly putting out albums like every 2-3 years. Sometimes he'd take a break. There's like a 5-year gap or whatever. But he was regularly putting out albums to this day. And this is ignoring the live albums, too.
Yeah, you're talking about albums, singles, videos, tours. He was busy.
Right, definitely busy. Whereas Dave, he was busy for the early part of his career.
Yeah.
And then after that, he was just it didn't interest him. He couldn't be bothered anymore. From a sales standpoint, you really can't blame him because, once A Little Ain't Enough hit and it only went to number 18 and it only went gold and it would just decline from there. And as we said before, it's like a shame, like the DLR Band. Great album.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic. But Dave basically self-released it, so it never really got the promotion it should. It never went anywhere. I mean, admittedly, it was 1998, so it wasn't a great time to be a classic artist either. But even today, it's just, you can't find the thing streaming as we complain about all the time.
Very true.
But anyway, yeah, Dave definitely had more solo platinum albums, so he wins in that regard. But in terms of sheer volume, Sam gets that win.
And in terms of solo hits, in 1985, Dave had a hit with California Girls, went to number 3. In 1985, he had Just a Gigolo, reaching number 12. In 1986, Yankee Rose went to number 16. And Going Crazy from 1986 went to 66. That's Life from 1986 went to 85. In 1988, Just Like Paradise hit number 6 on the Billboard charts. And Stand Up, the follow-up single, in 1988 went to number 64, which totals 2 top 10 songs and 2 top 20 songs. Now with Sam, I'm going to give Sam a little leeway here. I'm going to go even just before Van Halen because I want to give him a little chart success here. In 1977, he had a song called You Make Me Crazy, went to number 62. In 1979, Plain Jane hit number 77. In 1979, Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, a cover of that song, went to number 65. In 1982, Piece of My Heart, the cover of Janis Joplin's song, went to number 73. In 1982, I'll Fall in Love Again, went to number 43. In 1982, Your Love Is Driving Me Crazy, went to number 13. It's his highest charting single.
Interesting.
I know. This is interesting stuff. 1983, Never Give Up, went to number 46. In 1984, Two Sides of Love, which is the first single off of VOA, went to number 38. I Can't Drive 55. In 1984, went to number 26. 1987, Winner Takes It All, which is the single from the Sylvester Stallone arm wrestling classic, Over the Top.
Slow down, Tom,
That was a joke. That was a joke. That was a joke. Sense the sarcasm.
Oh, okay. All right.
Went to number 54. The movie was such a mess. That's why I called it a classic. So it went to number 54.
I know how you feel about Sly Stallone.
I do, but that movie's horrendous. Number 54. This is interesting. Give to Live from 1987 from the I Never Said Goodbye album went to number 23. But Eagles Fly from 1987 only hit 82. But the funny thing is that Eagles Fly is considered like the hit from that album, but Give to Live went way higher. It's interesting. Eagles Fly only came in at 82. So what did Sammy come up with? 1 top 20 song and 3 top 40 songs, which is funny because Dave had 2 top 10s and 2 top 20s. So Dave really wins that one. Interesting, huh?
Right. And the other thing that you and I like to talk about is that David Lee Roth would have one big single from an album, but he could never get the second one. He did pull it off the first time on his EP. California Girls went to 3.
Yeah, he did good with that
and
one.
Just a Gigolo went to 12.
Right.
But after that, Yankee Rose, strong at 16. But the next single, Going Crazy, only went to 66.
Right.
And then Just Like Paradise, huge single for him.
Yeah.
Number 6, but then he follows up with Stand Up, and that bombs at 64.
Right.
And then after that, he didn't have any singles that charted after that. He was only like a one-hit single kind of guy for the most part. And Sam, he had like middling chart success. Once in a while, he'd have a big one. Fascinating that his biggest hit is Your Love Is Driving Me Crazy.
Isn't that incredible?
And not I Can't Drive 55, which is easily his best-known song. Again, it just goes to show over time how some songs age and become classics, and other songs which were big at the time are just like forgotten.
And there's One Way to Rock. It's not even on there. Heavy Metal, Mas Tequila, Little White Lie.
No, none of that. Right. None of that stuff. And also interesting to note that Sam never had a top 40 after his I Never Said Goodbye / self-titled, whatever you want to call it, album.
Right.
Like all his post Van Halen albums, he never had his hit single.
Yeah, that's the truth. Now, here's Spotify streams, and they're up to the moment as we were recording this. Dave's top 5 songs, Just Like Paradise, comes in at 38.7 million streams. Number 2, Yankee Rose at 26.3 million streams. California Girls, 16.06 million streams. Just a Gigolo, I Ain't Got Nobody, 18.06 million streams. And surprising, number 5, Tobacco Road comes in at 6.2 million streams. That was
really?
that's a little sneaker one, and I would have never expected that.
I hear you loud and clear. That's
I thought that spot would
I don't know what else number 5 would
maybe
be.
Like Going Crazy, maybe A Little Ain't Enough. I would have expected something like that, not Tobacco Road, but that was a squeaker. Here's Sam's, okay? Sam's is interesting, too. He's got I Can't Drive 55 coming in at 56.3 million streams. Number 2 is Heavy Metal, 61.2 million streams. There's Only One Way to Rock, 14.9 million streams. Your Love Is Driving Me Crazy at 17.1 million streams. And number 5 is Mas Tequila at 12.5 million streams. So those are pretty much expected, right? Those are the ones.
Right. But again, fascinating that 3 of the songs that are his most popular streamers were not even charting singles back in the day.
That's an interesting one there. Sam, I think, wins that one. I think he's got more million streams, so that's an interesting tally there. Book sales. Now, we don't have the numbers on the book sales, but we both know that both were on the New York Times bestseller list. Dave's 1997 book, Crazy from the Heat, names everything crazy from the heat. The movie's crazy from the heat. The book's crazy from the heat. The EP's crazy from the heat. His book came out in 1997. It was on the New York Times bestseller list. However, Sam's was the number 1 on the bestseller list. Red, My Uncensored Life in Rock, which came out in 2011. Co-written by our good friend Joel Selvin, Dave. Remember him? We're still waiting for him to call back.
That's right. That's right.
So that's interesting. So we don't have the numbers on that because I don't have the ability to have that, but it seems like Sam would win that one. Obviously, his book went to number 1 on the bestsellers list, so Sam wins that victory for sure. Now, which feud was worse? This is an interesting topic. It's sort of a, perspective on this one. Dave's 1985 to 1995 feud with Van Halen or Sam's 1996 to 2003's feud? What do you think was worse?
I would say the Dave feud when Sammy was in the band.
Yeah.
Because, that's when it all started. The band was certainly promoting it heavily, if not promoting it, encouraging it. Once Sam left the band, there was some noise when Gary was in the band, but after that, it was quiet in Van Halen land until the 2004 tour. But I'd have to say the Dave versus Sam thing really started back in 85. And good God, like we're talking about this today, right? It's still going on. It divides families at Thanksgiving, Dave. Well, that's what happens.
Well, here's my question, though. I'm going to back this up. Who do you think had a worse fallout in 1996 with the band? Was it Dave or was it Sam?
I am going to avoid answering that and say Ed. Ed had the fallout. No, really, because he couldn't keep Sam.
Yeah.
He couldn't keep Dave.
Right, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that really wasn't a Dave versus Sam thing. That was almost like Sam got kicked out of the band, then Dave was in the band, then he got kicked out of the band. And so the both of them were like, oh, I guess we're both out of the band now. Sam found out he effectively wasn't in the band anymore on Father's Day.
Oh, yeah. Ugly,
that had been a slow build-up. To be fair, that was partly Sam's fault, too. There was fault on both sides. Sam is not completely innocent on that one.
Right.
And Dave was in a little bit of denial in 1996. I can't imagine Ed not being clear with him that, listen, we're just doing a couple of songs. And I think Dave had bigger aspirations, and he blew it because then his ego exploded. And that was that. I think the person who looks the worst in that situation is Ed and Al to a lesser extent.
Yeah.
Because they had Gary in there. So they had 3 lead singers in 1 year. 4, I guess, if you want to count Mitch Malloy, but that's more like an asterisk than a real count. No offense to Mitch.
Right.
But they didn't record anything and what have you. So, 1996 is a banner year for Van Halen effing up and disappointing their fans. Although I will say some solid music came from the band that year, despite all the shakeups. The Twister song, Humans Being, was one of the best things that they did with Sam.
Right.
The 2 Dave reunion songs were pretty solid.
Right.
And some people, they love those Dave reunion songs. They think it's the best thing the band ever did. I don't think I would go that far. But to me, 1996 was a lost opportunity because they were really firing on all cylinders. And if they had just continued with one of those guys and released an album in 96 or even 97, it could have been killer. But we'll never know, unfortunately.
That's true. Now we're going to look at the 2 reunions, the 2004 reunion with Sam and the 2007-2008 reunion with Dave. The Dave reunion grossed $93 million with 76 shows. It was the band's most profitable to date at the time in terms of touring. Sam's 2004 reunion tour grossed $54.3 million with 83 shows. So it looks like Dave won that one. Now, we also have to put an asterisk here that, obviously it's a few years later, ticket prices are higher for sure, but that was a huge tour. So the band really made a killing there. So what do you make of that, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, and the other factor is they hadn't toured with Dave in a long time.
Right.
That's the kind of show people come out of the woodwork to see. I mean, they hadn't toured in a few years with Sam, but that was not nearly as long. It was still somewhat fresh in people's minds. And the other thing was that tour with Sam in 2004 was a train wreck. Well, maybe train wreck's a little harsh. Ed was certainly, his demons were coming to light, and he was not playing as well as he could have and as he had on past tours, and the tour suffered because of that.
Right. Okay, so now we're going to look at the 2 live albums. We're looking at Tokyo Dome live in concert that Dave put out with the band in 2015 versus Sam's only live album with the band, Live Right Here, Right Now, which they put out in 1993 with Sam. So, looking at it, Tokyo Dome is interesting. It reached number 20 on the Billboard charts. We do not know how much it has sold because those numbers aren't available, but it's their first live album with David Lee Roth, first with Wolf. Obviously, Mike's not on there. And let's be honest, slammed by critics for Roth's voice, right? So, that was a mess. However, Sam's live album had a different situation. That was called Live Right Here, Right Now. It was recorded May 14th through 15th in 1992 and released in 93. Reached number 5 on the Billboard charts. Sold over 2 million. Went double platinum. And there's a video to match. Now, Dave's was recorded, I forgot to note this, June 21st of 2013, but released in 2015 with no video component. So in terms of Sam's, yeah, the album did well, and they put out a video to match. It looked great. But the problem here was, in his book, Red, My Uncensored Life in Rock, he said the problem was we re-recorded almost the entire live album because Eddie was out of tune, or Al had sped up or slowed down, and they, meaning the brothers, fixed everything. Only now that Eddie was playing in tune and my singing was off key, where Al sped up on runarounds, I'm singing ahead of the beat. Now I had to go back in the studio, redo my vocals, and I wanted to kill those guys. They put me in a room with the video of the concert and gave me my microphone, and I stood there and sang the whole fucking concert one time through just like it was a live performance. So that was from his book, Red, My Uncensored Life in Rock, which came out in 2011, which was quite a revelation. What did you make of that, Dave?
Well, in terms of the better live album, the one with Sam obviously sold more.
Right.
But you want to talk about a tale of 2 different live albums.
Yeah.
So the Sam album gets slammed because they redid it in the studio. The Dave album gets slammed because he did redo his vocals in the studio. So, the band cannot win. So which way do you go? As a listening experience, I'm kind of torn because I do think the Sam live album, whether it's live or not, it's pretty darn good. There's some really good stuff on there. Having said that, the Dave live album, I mean, the band is on fire as long as you're really not focusing too much on Dave's vocals. Instrumentally, it's great. So I'm kind of torn. And the other thing I'll note is, as you pointed out, the Dave album had no video component. The Sam live album did have a video component, but I don't think that video component is great at all.
Yeah.
Because it's the case of the amazing disappearing and reappearing shirt with Sammy, because he wore 2 different shirts on both nights that they recorded the show. And when you watch the video, his shirt is constantly switching when they intersplice video of the show. It's entertaining to watch after a little while, but then it just becomes distracting. Now, again, it's not really live because they're intersplicing 2 shows. I don't know if having a video like that really helps the situation at all. So, interesting how both live albums had 2 really different approaches to how they were done. And both have their strong points and both have their weak points. I don't know. I'm kind of torn. I'll give the edge to Live Right Here, Right Now with Sam. I feel like it's a slim margin.
Don't forget, Sam also put out Live Without a Net, which is not a live album, but a live video in 1986.
Well, that's phenomenal. That trumps those 2.
Yep.
Absolutely. As far as a video experience or even an audio experience, because the band was just on fire then and they weren't using pre-recorded keyboards or anything like that. That is a phenomenal live video album.
Right. And also, on top of that, the For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge Expanded Edition has 2 CDs and a Blu-ray of the December 4th, 1991 Dallas show, which obviously shows them in good form as well. So there's a lot more live in terms of Sam, so I'm going to give that to Sam for sure.
Oh, yeah, well, that's always the problem. Even in bootlegs, there's a lot better quality stuff with Sam than there is with Dave. And I know we've said this before, but I'll say it again. It just boggles the mind how little quality live stuff there is out there with Dave and the band. I mean, good Lord, it's like 1978 through 1984. There are other bands out there, older bands, lesser-known bands, who have lots of stuff out there. And there's like no Van Halen stuff. And you're just shaking your head going, what happened? Who dropped the ball here? Where did it go? Or why didn't they do it in the first place? It's a head-scratcher, really.
And now, in terms of number of videos, funny thing is they have almost the same amount of videos, in the sense that Dave has 14 videos, You Really Got Me, Running with the Devil, Jamie's Crying, Dance the Night Away, Loss of Control, Unchained, So This Is Love, Hear About It Later, Pretty Woman, Jump, Panama, Hot for Teacher, Tattoo, and She's the Woman. Sam has When It's Love, Finish What You Started, Feels So Good, Pound Cake, Run Around, Right Now, Top of the World, 2 versions, Dreams, which is live, Don't Tell Me What Love Can Do, Can't Stop Loving You, Amsterdam, Not Enough, Humans Being, and It's About Time. So Sam edges him out with 15 videos because there's 2 versions of Top of the World. But there's 3 iconic ones with Dave, which is Jump, Panama, and Hot for Teacher. And Sam's iconic one is only 1, which is Right Now. So I would say that Dave wins that one just because of the iconic ones. And what do you think, Dave?
It's interesting how many videos they did before MTV was even on the air, or videos were a thing. So the fact they have about as many as Sam is interesting, because even back then they were recording themselves for whatever TV shows would show it back in the day. Certainly Van Halen has some iconic videos. I mean, like the Hot for Teacher one is iconic. I don't see Panama as all that iconic, quite frankly. It's just a bunch of leftovers. And even Jump is just them performing in front of a camera. So right. I don't think that's all that great either. I think Pretty Woman is a heck of a video. I mean, MTV was scared to put it on. So I do think that's good. And then the Sam era, as you and I like to complain all the time, they didn't have any videos for the 5150 album. And then when they started doing videos, that was really like the height of videos on MTV, and a lot of them were slick. And the Van Halen videos, for the most part, you could interchange them with other bands, with the exception being Right Now. That one won several awards, and it really was miles above anything else, and it was very interesting for the time, despite the fact that Sam originally hated it. Right. So interesting how they approached videos.
So now we come to the part that Dave wanted to add here. What is the better album? So 1986, 5150 versus Eat 'Em and Smile. Where do you stand?
This one is the toughest one.
Yes.
Because I can, right? Okay,
Yeah.
So I waffle on this all the time.
Right.
Sometimes it depends on the day, to be honest to you. It's like really close. But I'm going to give it to Eat 'Em and Smile. It's like a hair-thin edge because both albums are really good. But for me, today, it's Eat 'Em and Smile. How about you?
I'm going to agree with that. I really kind of fall in line with that. You have to realize these are very equated to me. They're almost like a dead heat, 5150, Eat 'Em and Smile. So I love them both. So it's hard, but I would say Eat 'Em and Smile definitely has a lot of more personality and swagger. I agree with your statement that it kind of just edges it out.
Eat 'Em and Smile at times reminds me of older Van Halen.
Right.
Whereas 5150... you start getting some love songs in there that start sliding into...
Yeah, but what gives it the edge, in my opinion, is Eat 'Em and Smile still sounds very fresh. Whereas 5150 definitely sounds of its time.
That's the challenge with keyboard albums. They are of their time, and they can sound very dated.
Yeah, very true. Now, 1988's OU812 versus Skyscraper. Where do you stand here?
Oh, Skyscraper, all day, every day.
Now
This
you
one's a
feel that
slam
way.
dunk for me. It's a better album. OU812, I think Van Halen started losing their eye on the ball. So I just prefer Skyscraper. I think it's a solid album. Not as good as Eat 'Em and Smile, but very solid. Interestingly, both bands were really pushing the keyboards on their respective albums. So despite the fact that David left the band, they're both heading in similar directions and releasing albums in the same year and on the same record label, which I always found fascinating. They weren't releasing them the same month. They were like, a few months apart, but always very interesting, the similarities between the albums. But as far as the one I like, Skyscraper, is definitely better than OU812.
Okay, this is really hard for me. There's so much I like on OU812, and I gotta be honest with you, I probably listen to OU812 more than I do Skyscraper. But, I don't know. Here's the problem. They both disappoint me. I love both albums, but they both disappoint me because mainly in the production quality for OU812 with the lack of mic space and also the poor Sammy lyrics. Skyscraper sounds very canned to me. It doesn't have that cool vibe that Eat 'Em and Smile had, and I gotta be honest with you, I really feel like Dave completely wasted the talent that he had in the band with Vi and Sheehan and Bissonette on this album and just overrode it with the keyboards. I don't know. It's sort of a dead heat with me. It's weird because I have extreme disappointments on both sides. Very difficult.
You gotta pick one.
I gotta pick one. I'm gonna go with OU812 because
alrighty.
Because I listened to it more and Ed's guitar is fantastic on it. But to be honest with you, there's some great Ed stuff on there. But I just feel the disappointment that I had with Dave was even greater. Now Sam's, his lyrics, he's dropped the ball on almost every album with lyrics. And, the whole thing with Mike, nothing against Mike. It was the producer's fault. Lack of production without the bass. But there are songs that I love on there and listen to constantly. Like, I absolutely love Cabo Wabo. I absolutely love Black and Blue. I absolutely love Mine All Mine. AFU. But Skyscraper, I cannot get over how Dave built this incredible band. And then he just went crazy with the keyboards on that album and didn't use the firepower that he created in that band. I think I'm so disappointed in the follow-up to Eat 'Em and Smile that I have to go with OU812. Even though, with all its flaws and disappointments that it has, I can't believe what Dave did. That was too far left turn, in my opinion, and it was too early to make an artistic decision like that. Though there's songs on there that I love, but it's just too canned. Anyway.
That's interesting because that's exactly how I feel about OU812.
Interesting. All right, so we're on to year 1991. The album is for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge versus A Little Ain't Enough. What do you think?
I'm going to give for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge the vote on this one.
Yeah.
Van Halen returned back to guitar-oriented songs. The album sounds great. They got Andy Johns in there. Again, similarities from both camps. Dave also returns to rock with A Little Ain't Enough, but he doesn't quite succeed on the same level as Van Halen does. A lot of his songs are reminiscent of other songs, and even the ones that stand up on his own, they're good, but they're not great. I find myself going back to For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge more than I go back to A Little Ain't Enough. A Little Ain't Enough, I'll go back, I'll listen to it once, maybe twice. I'm like, yeah, all right, that's good. That's what I need. But I prefer For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge in this case.
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with that. I'm all for that because I think that's Sammy's best album with the band. I do love A Little Ain't Enough, and I think it's an incredible effort. And I love that album, and it's a very re-listenable album. Everybody should really take that album out and dust it off a little bit and give it a little taste, because I really think it's a good album. So I have to go with For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. Van Hagar was at the top of their game, and I think that they really spent a lot of time. Love the Andy Johns production. They really came back and fixed a lot of issues that they had with OU812 and made a strong effort. I do think that, too, with A Little Ain't Enough with Dave, but it was a little too late, but I still enjoyed that album. So, on to 1995's Balance versus 1994's Your Filthy Little Mouth. Where do you stand?
Oh, well, this one's another easy one. Definitely Balance. Van Halen was still rocking it out, and Dave, I'll give him credit for being original and going in a different direction because he realized the direction he wasn't going in wasn't going to work anymore, so he tried something new, but it didn't work for me. He tried a lot of things but didn't necessarily succeed with them. The Van Halen Balance album, you know what it is? It's more comfortable for me, Dave. It's tried, it's true, it's steady. It's not perfect,
right?
But there's quite a few good rockin' songs on there. That Jamaican song he did sends a shiver up my spine every time I think about it. So
it's no big thing, man. No big thing.
No big thing. You know what? That album is no big thing. That's what the album should have been called. No big thing.
Exactly.
But anyway, there's some high points on the album, but on the whole, I definitely got to give it to Balance.
Yeah, I agree for sure. I think the band sounds phenomenal on this album. The thing that disappoints me about Balance, although I'm giving it the win, there's just some shit in there that doesn't belong in there. Like, get rid of Alex's drum solo. Get rid of Strung Out. There's a little bit of fat on there, like, obviously, Wham Bam Amsterdam. I love that song. Love the song Amsterdam. I just fixed that one lyric. Could just make such a difference in that song. Wham Bam sounds so fucking horrendous. And the song is phenomenal. And I don't even mind that he sings Amsterdam, but I just think the Wham Bam, I could have fixed it. It's that easy to fix. So there's that. The funny thing about that album is it's called Balance, and it's not really balanced. It's sort of a little off-kilter, but,
It is a little off-balance.
Yeah, and it also, I think the sequencing is kind of off. I think they could have fixed that and should have added crossing over.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and getting rid of some of that fat and put crossing over on there. But I do love Balukatherium and even the singles. And, as much as Not Enough is a little drippy, it's still a good song. It's a well-written song. I just think it's that dragginess that it's in Love Walks In and When It's Love, that da-na-na-na-na, and it just goes on and the dragginess of it. But I guess I haven't heard it as much as When It's Love. How do I know when it's love? It's just and it's just like, oh my God, the weird part about Not Enough that kind of freaks me out, which is funny, and the video emphasizes this, is the background vocals with the guys standing around the mic like they're the fucking Four Seasons. I'm like, what is going on with this? It hurts so much. It is like, what are you, this is Van Halen. What the fuck are you doing? Don't Tell Me, kick-ass song. Can't Stop Loving You, great pop song. I mean, it's well crafted. Yeah. And let me tell you something about that song. That motherfucking song is a sneaky bastard because that song is incredibly popular. If you look at the streams it has on iTunes, it's tremendous. It really, really is. It's unbelievable. So that wraps it up.
No.
What?
No.
What?
We've got the bonus round.
What's the bonus round?
The bonus round is the following.
Okay.
Still Dave versus Sam.
Right.
The year is 1998.
Right.
And also 1997. And this is the steel cage match with 3 people in there. You ready?
Yeah.
The 3 contestants are the following.
Okay.
The DLR Band.
Yes.
By David Lee Roth.
Right.
The Marching to Mars.
Yeah.
Album.
Right.
By Sammy.
Right.
And Van Halen 3. Obviously by Van Halen.
Right.
Which one do you pick?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, here's the weird part about this whole thing. I love the DLR Band, but it's going to drive you nuts. I listen to Van Halen 3 way more than DLR Band. I don't know if it's my absolute bizarre fascination with that album. I do like that album, but like I said this before, I'll say it again. I don't consider it a Van Halen album. I don't consider it an Eddie Van Halen solo album. I consider it like a side project album that Eddie did with Gary Cherone. I like that album, and I listen to it a lot. Maybe it's because Dave's is not on streaming. I don't know, but I don't listen to the DLR Band album as much. So I'm going to piss you off and say Van Halen 3. How do you like that?
Well, that doesn't surprise me all that much, quite frankly, but I'm going with the DLR Band album all day, every day.
Okay.
It does what the Van Halen 3 album fails at.
Okay.
It really does. It's just a great rocking album. Dave gets John 5. They write some great songs.
Right, that's true, yeah.
And the album just kicks butt. Even his mellow songs are fantastic. Black Sand, one of the best things he ever did. Mm-hmm. And I just love that album, and it's underappreciated. And Van Halen 3 just fails in so many ways. And Sam's Marching to Mars album, it's okay, it's good, but it's nothing
very uneven.
To the DLR Band.
Very uneven.
Yes. So that was bonus round number 1. We have bonus round number 2, and then I promise we're done.
Okay? Yeah.
Okay, so the year is 2012, 2013.
Yeah.
It's A Different Kind of Truth.
Right.
And Sammy Hagar and Friends.
Oh,
Which do
Jesus
you
Christ,
pick?
Dave, come on. That's a hands-down win. Different got a try.
Okay, well, I agree. I'm going with you, but, you're the one who picked Van Halen 3, so I have to ask the question.
And we'll remind our listeners that you put Without You as your top 20 Van Halen song of all time.
Yes, I did. I like that song a lot. I'll stand by that. But I certainly didn't pick Van Halen 3 over DLR.
I have to be honest with you. I love the DLR Band album, but the thought of voting for Van Halen 3 to piss you off was too good to resist.
Hey, whatever gets you through the night, it's all right.
That's right.
It's all right.
That's right.
All right.
All right, sir. Well, that wraps up Dave and Sam by the numbers, and it is fascinating to analyze these guys to death of all the different points, because really a lot of these facts are not out there and in the open. Like, I had to go searching for all these things and kind of put them together to kind of give you an overall picture of where these guys are at and what their achievements are. And, we always hear back and forth rhetoric from both of them. Oh, I did this, I did that, blah, blah, blah. But the hard facts are the hard facts, and when you get hard facts, you got to go to the numbers. As Dave knows, as an accountant, it kind of gives you the bottom line. So just wanted to give you guys a little taste of Dave and Sam by the numbers.
Whoa! How about that for rock video music fans? Live all day, all night. You know what you need. Only right here on Dave TV.
Check us out on Facebook at Dave and Dave Unchained, a Van Halen podcast, on Twitter at DD Unchained, on Instagram at DD Unchained Podcast, and you can email us at ddunchainedpodcast@gmail.com.